We start with the agenda, and from a process standpoint, I'm gonna just remind the members of the public that once we get to an agenda item and we have first a presentation by the city staff in regard to the agenda item, it usually comes back to the commission for clarification questions. And then after that, the members of the public will have the opportunity of asking questions. Again, this is not a dialogue. There will be just opportunities for you to echo your thoughts and ask questions, but there will be no communication back to you. Before we start, are there any comments from the public on items that are not on the agenda? This is the only chance you have tonight to speak on items that are not on the agenda. And so you can either raise your hand with the, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a blue hand to raise your hand. Or you can just simply speak up and we'll give you a few moments to speak on items not on the agenda. All right, I don't see any requests. So with that, actually, I'm gonna ask our Director of Transportation, Jim, to introduce our new Transportation Manager, Marissa. So welcome aboard, Marissa, and Jim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. It's my pleasure to welcome Miss Marissa Lee as the city's new Transportation Services Manager in the Engineering Services Department. Marissa has 12 years of experience working as a transportation planner and engineer in both the private and public sectors, which is nice to kind of have that cross-training. Her areas of expertise include innovative concept design and technical construction documents with a focus on complete streets and active transportation. She most recently worked 5 years at Alta Planning and Design, who we intimately know, and they're the firm doing our Complete Streets Master Plan, where she worked on transportation projects all over California. And Jeff, if you're already on the line, I'm sorry we swiped her from you, but you guys will still have an opportunity to work together. One of the things that struck me about her resume was her participation in Alta's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and her passion for equity in the planning process. She is committed to public outreach that both seeks the input of residents who may have historically experienced inequities in the planning process, and also provides the opportunity for community members to contribute their lived experience. Marissa has extensive experience with plan implementation, balancing the needs of multiple stakeholders, and working with community groups to form a shared vision. Once we started witnessing these talents, we decided to give her an opportunity here as she was working for Alta in this regard. Marissa's education background is a good fit in Los Altos. She actually has 2 master's degrees, one in transportation engineering and the other in city and regional planning, both from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, as well as a bachelor's in global economics from UCSC. A couple of fun facts. She loves hiking and backpacking and has backpacked on the Lost Coast, wherever that is, the Sierras, the Andes, and Patagonia. She also loves traveling and has spent time in South America, Asia, and Europe. So Marissa, if you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa. It's so nice to meet all of you. I've talked to a couple of you already, but it's nice to meet the rest of you, and I hope I get to chat with you more soon. I'm really looking forward to this role and working with all of you and working with the community of Los Altos. One thing that I noticed when working for Alta and working on the Complete Streets Master Plan for Los Altos was how engaged the community is and the attention to detail that the community members have. And it seems everyone really wants to make really informed decisions and wants to make the community as great as it can be. So that really caught my attention. I'm really excited to be here. I've really enjoyed the first, I guess it's been a month so far, and look forward to getting to know you all more and getting to know the community better. So thank you for having me.
Marissa, thank you. Welcome aboard. We look forward to work with you. I know that you've made Jim very happy. I've seen major smiles on his face, so that's a great place to start.
Thank you.
Great, wonderful. So with that, let's move to the first item on the agenda, and that is the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was on the 26th of May. Any comments from the commissioners, or if not, do I see a motion to admit those minutes? Wow. Okay, Suresh, please go ahead.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Steve, we have a motion for approving the minutes from the last meeting. Can I see a hands going up if you're approved? And that way it's easier to count. Okay, I see all hands up, so we're unanimous, 7 approving the motion. Okay, we'll move to the second item, and that is the SB 330 Housing Crisis Act of 2019. Marissa, are you taking that, or is someone else going to speak?
Chair, I can chime in. I haven't been at the Complete Streets Commission before, so I'm Jolie Houston. I'm your new city attorney. Well, not so new anymore. So I'm glad to meet everybody, and I'm going to introduce my associate in my public law land use department at my firm, Eric Ramakrishnan, and he is going to provide SB 330 training for you or background for you, because it's something that you should be aware of with projects that are coming forward. And also that there is going to be some joint meetings between Complete Streets and Planning Commission, because we have a limitation on how many public hearings we can have. So we may end up having joint meetings with Planning Commission and Complete Streets, because we only get 5, but that's a spoiler alert. I'll let Eric break that news to you. And so Planning Commission has already had this training, and so we will be scheduled to have a joint meeting. And so I worked with Jim and Guido and John Biggs at the planning side with the traffic side. And we want you to be able to have the same background when you're at that joint meeting with the Planning Commission. We wanted everybody to be on the same wavelength. And so I'm going to now introduce Eric, and he has done work in Fremont. He's worked at a private firm doing affordable housing and land use. And he was with the county of
Kings County.
Kings County. I know you were down in the valley and lived in Hanford. So he has a lot of background, a lot of experience. And my law partner, Andy, in our municipal law department, we really are happy to have Eric. And we used to be just 2 of us, and so now we have Eric, and so we call him our tiebreaker. So when we can't agree, we've got a third person to break the tie, or sometimes Eric and I agree and Andy doesn't agree. So anyway, we're just very happy to have him on board. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric to provide this training, and so enjoy.
Okay, thanks, Jolie. As Jolie said, I was asked to give a presentation on SB 330, which is the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. It went into effect on January 1st of 2020, and it changes in several large respects, several significant ways, the way cities are required to process approvals for housing development projects. And as Jolie indicated, as projects come forward, you may hear staff say, well, we're constrained by SB 330 in that way. We want you to understand what SB 330 is and how it affects the approval process for housing development projects. The primary goal is to streamline that approval process. Right now, California is in a housing crisis in that there are more people who want to live in California than there are housing units, and the legislature is trying to deal with that in many different ways. And in the opinion of the legislature, at least, one of the ways to deal with that is to kind of make it easier and faster for developers to get housing development projects approved. And so that's the goal of the law. I just want to mention that as I go through and talk about it, SB 330, some parts of it aren't new. Some parts of it incorporate existing laws and to make them consistent with the rest of 330 or to make them more robust, I guess. And so some of what I'm going to be telling you isn't new, some of it is. And we'll talk about that as I go through. So SB 330, as I said, it applies only to housing development projects. It doesn't apply to other types of development. So I want to define housing development project. It's defined in the law as one of three types of projects. A project that involves residential units only, and that S in units is significant. So a single family home on a single lot that doesn't involve a subdivision is not a housing development project, but according to the California Department of Housing and Urban Development, if that single family home is going to be developed with an ADU, you now have 2 units, and it is the housing development project. So that's something cities have to be aware of. Housing development project is also a mixed use development that includes commercial and residential components, so long as at least 2/3 of the square footage is designated for residential use. That's not just 2/3 of the building structure, but 2/3 of the site is devoted to residential use. So a parking area that's devoted to residential use counts toward that 2/3. And a transitional or supportive housing development also counts as a housing development project. So we're not talking about purely commercial uses, and we're not talking about single family residences without an ADU. There's 3 steps in, these 3 steps were already there in the planning process for housing development projects. But before SB 330, these 3 steps were a little bit more fluid. Now it's really necessary for cities as they process applications for housing development projects to think of these 3 steps as distinct phases in and of themselves and not to sort of get them mixed up. And that's kind of the main point I want to get across in my presentation today. So I want to talk about the application phase, the consistency review, and the approval process or disapproval process. So when I talk about the application phase, the first of those 3 phases, I'm talking about completeness review. In California, we have a law called the Permit Streamlining Act that was amended by SB 330 that it was designed to kind of resolve 2 competing goals. When a developer applies for planning permission to construct any kind of development project, the local agency, the city or the county, has an interest in getting as much information as possible so that it can thoroughly and effectively evaluate that application. And that takes time and effort and money. And meanwhile, the developer has a competing interest in seeing that application get processed as quickly as possible so that it can be heard on the merits as soon as possible. Those goals obviously conflict. And so the Permit Streamlining Act sets forth a process that says that, okay, developer, you want to build a housing development project. You're going to submit an application to the city or the county if it's unincorporated on a form that's provided. You're going to provide the information that you think you need to provide. And city, you have 30 days to review that information and tell the developer if anything is missing, if you need more information. If you don't tell the developer that you need more information in 30 days, then the application is deemed complete and we move to the next step of the process. That applies, that is existing California law. That's been California law for years, and that applies to all kinds of housing development projects. But SB 330 changed that process in several ways as it applies specifically to housing development projects. So one way that SB 330 changed that application process is by adding a step called the preliminary application. This is a form, it's like a roughly 8-page form that the applicant who is interested in developing a property with a housing development project can fill out and submit to the city. Just to say, hey, by the way, I'm planning to build this project that I'm describing in this form. It's kind of a bizarre process because all that the applicant does is just get that on file with the city. The city doesn't actually do anything with it. It's for the city's information. So there's, the city has an interest in looking at that, but it really is just a matter of getting that preliminary application on file. And once the developer does that, then the developer vests all of the zoning rules, general plan rules, subdivision rules fees, etc., that are in place at the date that preliminary application is submitted for 180 days, or if the developer gets their formal application in within those 180 days for 2 years, and unless the developer significantly changes the project. So just getting that form on file bests the development rules that are in place at the time, and that adds an extra step to the process. After the developer submits this new preliminary application, then the developer still needs to submit their formal application for the housing development project, just like they always did. But there's some new caveats. First of all, for housing development projects, the city has to have a formal and published application checklist. And it's not allowed to ask for things that aren't on that checklist. There are some exceptions that I'll talk about, but it is, for the most part, limited to asking for what's on that checklist. Whereas before, the city had some flexibility to say, well, now that we understand your project a little bit more, we'd actually like some more information about it. This takes away that flexibility. And so that checklist needs to be as robust as possible. And the city has recently adopted its SB 330 checklist. I want to be clear that that's a separate checklist. Sometimes the preliminary application is called a checklist. I want to be clear that there's a preliminary application that is just a short form that the developer gets on file to best rights. Then comes the formal application, and the city has a formal application checklist that goes along with it.
Yeah. Eric, can I jump
Sure.
in here? So this is one of the things that we really want to make sure that the Planning Commission, Complete Streets, you understand. This is a critical point, because when projects come through the review process in front of you, the days of being able to add conditions or change things is severely limited. And so I want Eric, that's one of the critical points, is before we could sort of add things as we went along, but we're not going to be able to do that. And then, you know, later on, there'll be health and safety and maybe fire code issues that can be addressed at that point. But Eric, I want you to make sure that that's a critical component. So I didn't miss, is that true?
Yes, yeah, no, that's right. As I indicated, under the Permit Streamlining Act, it's been the law for a long time that after the city gets its formal application for the housing development project, that it has 30 days to review that and let the developer know if there's anything missing. Otherwise, the application is deemed complete. For housing development projects, there's a new rule that completeness letter that the city needs to send within 30 days needs to be complete and exhaustive. What that means is that before, there's usually a few round of completeness letters that go back and forth between the city and the developer as the city fleshes out what information it needs to process the application. And in the past, you might not have mentioned something in the initial completeness letter that sort of you realize for a subsequent completeness letter would be helpful to have. But for housing development projects from now on, that first completeness letter needs to be complete and exhaustive. If you forget to ask for something in that, you can't ask for it in a subsequent completeness letter. So that's a significant limitation on the city. And the last thing that changed about the Permit Streamlining Act for housing development projects under SB 330, and I find this a little bit weird and confusing, because the purpose of the application phase is supposed to be just to collect information about the project, not to make any determinations about the project. You get your information, and then once you have the information you need, then you process the application and make determinations. But now we're required to make historical resource determinations at the outset, before the end of that 30-day period to review the application. So it's not just about gathering the information. We actually have to make historical resource determinations up front. And that means that staff basically is going to have to make those determinations that maybe in the past were made by commissions. Okay, when I talk about SB 330 with staff, I always remind them of what I call the 4 C's. It's sort of my made up term for it. There are issues that in the past, it was sort of okay, to confuse with the idea of completeness review, that we now really need to keep separate. with the exception of the historic resource determination I talked about, that application phase, the completeness review, as I said, the sole purpose of that is to find out is to determine whether the applicant has provided all the information the city needs to process the application. It's not a time to prejudge the merits of the project. There is a separate opportunity for that I'll talk about next, to evaluate the project's consistency with the city standards. Also, there is one exception to the rule that we have to ask for everything up front, and that's CEQA. If we need further information in order to process CEQA review, we can ask for that at any time. And so things that we're asking for purposes of environmental review only, we need to sort of think about in a separate bucket. And then the last C, I think in a lot of cities, there has been kind of a trend historically of identifying up front for the applicant while you're still evaluating the application for completeness, what kinds of conditions of approval might need to be imposed upon the project. Or maybe you might say, well, I want to see X in the plans, when it can really be a condition of approval imposed on the project later on. It's kind of important, again, that this is not an opportunity to prejudge the merits of the project. And so that kind of belongs at the approval phase, not at the completeness review phase. So again, completeness, we're just evaluating whether we have the information we need to process. Consistency comes next. CEQA is a separate topic because we can ask for information for CEQA at any time. And conditions of approval really kind of falls under the approval process, not the application process. I want to mention another law that has been in place in California. It was adopted in 2017 and it's been in place since January 1st of 2018. And it provides, it's SB 35, and it provides for streamlined ministerial approval of some housing development projects. There are umpteen dozen criteria a project has to meet to qualify for SB 35. But if the project does qualify, it gets approved over the counter, almost like a building permit. So it could be a 200 unit development and it gets approved at the staff level over the counter once the applicant establishes that they meet all the criteria in SB 35. That's a little unusual because we don't normally think of large development projects being approved over the counter that way. But if it does qualify, and they're rare, there are a number of criteria the project has to meet. I don't think we've ever, maybe we've had one in Los Altos. It does get approved ministerially. It is not subject to the Permit Streamlining Act. It's a completely separate process because the Permit Streamlining Act applies to discretionary projects. You won't see SB 35 projects, but you should know that it's a different application process. It follows a different schema than what I'm describing, and it can result in over-the-counter approval of some pretty large housing development projects. Okay, I said that under SB 330, we really need to keep the steps of the project into 3 different buckets. So there's the application process that I just talked about. And then for housing development projects only, there's a consistency review that happens next. This doesn't apply to other types of development projects, and this isn't new. This is part of the Housing Accountability Act. The Housing Accountability Act has been on the books for a long time, but some changes were made to it in SB 330. It's incorporated into SB 330, and it was in 2017, effective in 2018, amended significantly and given a lot more teeth than it ever had in the past. And that change in 2018 required what's called consistency review. And this is a really big deal. Once the application is deemed complete, the city has all the information that it requires in its application checklist. Staff has 30 days if the project has 150 units or fewer, or 60 days if it has more than 150 units, to review that project and determine whether that project is consistent with all of the city's objective standards. If the city fails to make that determination within the 30 or 60-day timeline, it basically waives those standards. So if you have an objective standard that a building can only be 35 feet tall, and somebody comes in with an application for a 50-foot building, But during consistency review, the city forgets to point out, oh, that's inconsistent with our objective height standard. That's waived. What do I mean by objective standards? You're going to hear a lot about objective standards from now on in California when we talk about housing development projects. The push is to, generally speaking, when a project complies with objective standards, it should be approved. Objective means a standard that involves no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and being uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official. So the sort of example of what's an objective standard that I always like to give is a 45-foot height maximum is objective. You and I can both pull out our measuring tapes and determine whether the building will be 45 feet and no higher. There's not much room for us to disagree about whether the building meets that standard. But a standard like consistent with community character, you and I can be rational, reasonable people and have a legitimate opinion about that and come to grossly different conclusions. That's a subjective standard. When we're talking about consistency review, we're looking for whether the project is consistent with objective standards. This is why it's really important for communities to have objective standards, because otherwise you have limited discretion to deny projects without those objective standards, because my next point. Anyway, if the project is consistent with, there we go. If the project is consistent with all of your objective standards, with limited exceptions based on health and safety findings that are very difficult to make, you basically have to approve the project. You can condition it in ways that do not make it infeasible or that do not lower the density of the project, but you basically have to approve the housing development project if it meets those objective standards. So at that second stage, once the application is deemed complete, there's a consistency review to determine whether the project complies with objective standards. The city has a very limited time to do that review. If it forgets to point out an objective standard, it waives it. And if the project is consistent with objective standards, the city has very limited discretion to deny the project. And I kind of got into talking about the approval, but one thing to keep in mind at the approval stage is what I just said. If the project complies with objective standards, the city can only deny it under very limited circumstances based upon health and safety findings that are difficult to make. Another thing that you need to be aware of at the approval process, and this is what Jolie pointed out at the beginning, and this is very relevant to your committee, and it's the reason why you might see more joint committees with other commissions, is that the city can now, once a project is deemed complete, the city can only hold 5 hearings on the project before it either approves or denies the project ultimately. A hearing is any city-sponsored meeting that involves the project. So that includes community workshops facilitated by the city. It includes commission meetings, it includes council meetings, it includes appeals, and it also includes study sessions. It includes continued meetings. So if you take up the project and it gets to be 2 o'clock in the morning and you want to continue it to the next meeting, that's now 2 hearings. The only exception to that is meetings held solely for purposes of CEQA do not count. But that is the exception to the rule. If the meeting is held for any other reason other than CEQA, then it's subject to that 5 hearing limit.
Eric, isn't there, before, you can have hearings before, when it's just a preliminary applications, before a preliminary application's been submitted?
This applies once the project is deemed complete. So I know that planning staff have been proactive in encouraging developers, they can't make them, but in encouraging developers to voluntarily bring their projects to commissions before the application is deemed complete, to sort of air out the project, get community feedback about the project before they submit their formal development application, so that if there is feedback that the developer should incorporate, they can get that feedback early on.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I mentioned that with limited exceptions, you cannot deny the project if it complies with all objective standards. You can condition the project in ways that do not lower the density of the project and that do not make the project infeasible. So, for example, if a project complies with all of the city's objective standards, but it just sort of doesn't fit in within the surrounding properties, if there's a way to modify the project that doesn't reduce the density. So for example, you couldn't reduce the height, or you couldn't require a further setback if that's going to reduce the density. But you could say, you know, I don't like the exterior finishes on the project, change the exterior finishes, even though there isn't an objective standard that requires the developer to do that. The city still has that much discretion. And importantly, the city can still require mitigation under CEQA whenever it's required to address an impact identified under CEQA. In addition to changing the application process and making the Housing Accountability Act more robust around the consistency review and changing some of the approval requirements, there are a few other things that SB 330 does that we should be aware of. One is that we cannot have any new subjective design standards until 2025. So the city does have a number of subjective design standards on the book already, and that's fine. We can't use those to deny projects or to lower the density, but we can use them to condition projects in minor ways to make them more fitting with community character. We can't adopt new subjective design standards though. There's also a no net loss requirement until 2025. So that if we downzone one parcel, we have to upzone another parcel to make up for it so that the same number of housing units can effectively still be built throughout the city. So that's something we need to be mindful of before. We can't just go around downzoning housing parcels without finding new parcels to upzone. There's also a replacement housing requirement. So let's say that there's an apartment building on a property that maybe hasn't been operational in the last 5 years. It has 25 units and the developer wants to demolish that and replace it with 10 units. That can't be done. The developer has to replace the units that were there. So it would have to be at least 25 units in that case where we had the 25 unit apartment building. It can't be less. And we can't, if the city had an anti-growth ordinance, which it doesn't, we couldn't enforce that until 2025. There is one exception. The legislature made an exception for Hillsborough. Anti-growth ordinances are ordinances that limit the number of building permits that the city will issue for new housing developments to some set number. And those cannot be enforced for the time being. But that doesn't apply to Los Altos. So that's the overview. Makes us rethink the application process. It makes the consistency review more robust. We need to think about the 5 hearing limit during the approval process. We need to approve the project in most cases if it complies with all objective standards. We can't lower the density in most cases if it complies with all objective standards. And we need to think about these issues here. Are there any questions from the commission that I can help answer?
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to invite the commissioners. If you have any brief questions, please, this is the place to do it. Let's not stretch them into discussions. We can take it offline with the legal team. Short questions. Suzanne, please go ahead.
Yes, quick question. What is our current list of, what's our current application checklist? Where is that and where can we review it?
It's recently been adopted. It should be online. I'd have to check with planning staff to confirm that.
Can you please circulate that to this commission so that we can review it and ensure all of our requirements are captured there?
Sure.
Yeah, we can do that, and I know it's we've done it and we've completed it, we've added to it, and so it is sort of right now I believe it's a completed checklist, but Guido is the one that we can get it from, and he calls it the mother of all checklists, so he guards that checklist. So we can get it, and what I'll do is Eric and I can get it, and then we send it to, I guess,
Melissa.
Melissa, yeah. So our new person. So we'll send it to her.
Is there an opportunity to revise that checklist? Should we see the need?
I mean, it's fine to revise it if there's an application that's already in the pipeline. It's subject to the checklist that was in place at the time it submitted
Understood.
its preliminary application.
Second question. This applies to residential remodels that include an ADU. What was the number of ADU applications that Los Altos experienced last year?
And just to be clear, I don't have that information. We could find out, but just to be clear, not necessarily remodels. If somebody is going to build a house and include an ADU as part of the construction, then that's a housing development project.
But not a remodel, and a remodel would be something that has one wall standing, correct?
Not when if they're not adding units to it, then it doesn't apply. If you're asking about if they're going to remodel the base unit and build an ADU as part of that remodel, then yes, I believe it would apply. And in terms of the number, I don't know. I'm sure we can find out though.
Okay, more questions from the commission?
Last question. Our current general plan, especially the housing element, is woefully out of date. I believe it's from late 1990s or maybe early 2000s. What is the impact of that on SB 330? Do we have an opportunity to update our general housing element in our general plan?
I mean, we can update the city's general plan if council feels that that's appropriate to do. In terms of the impact, I mean, the relevance of the general plan, one thing I didn't kind of get into the weeds on here is that if the general plan allows housing, but the zoning is inconsistent and doesn't allow housing, then the developer gets to build their housing. And so that's an issue that the city needs to be mindful of, making sure that those two match up so we avoid those situations.
Thank you.
We can't require rezonings. If your general plan allows a different density and you want that density, the city cannot make you rezone. You get to go under the general plan.
More questions from the commission?
Yeah, I got a couple quick ones. You called out CEQA. Can I assume it's the acronym means California Environmental Quality Act?
Yes, I apologize.
Because
yes, that's right.
It's not listed as spelled out what it is in there, your presentation, but HAA is, so you might want to include that.
Sure, I apologize for that. We refer to CEQA a lot, so I just kind of get used to it.
I understand that.
Yeah.
And then on your last chart, your last presentation there, the last page, it's got 2025. Is there a reason for that year as opposed to 2 years or 10 years out?
The legislature makes the rules and we explain them. I can't really tell you what the thinking was there.
All right, thank you.
Okay, other questions? Suresh?
And so I just had a clarification on the checklist. Does the objective standard, is that part of the checklist or is that a separate list? What those standards are?
No, when I'm talking about objective standards, I'm talking about any objective standards the city has in place, whether it's through design rules, whether it's through its subdivision ordinance, its zoning ordinance, its general plan, any standard that applies to that project, wherever it comes from, that can be described as objective, meaning you and I can look at the same standard and the same project to determine whether the standard's met. So that sort of creates a burden on staff to know all of the objective standards that are in place so that it can evaluate them with respect to a project.
Yeah, and people the commissioners may understand we're going through the objective standards right now. They've gone through the planning commission and they've gone to council and we've had several study sessions. So when we get those objective standards adopted, which I think it's going to be soon, then we'll have to, note to you, Eric and Guido, we're going to have to probably check the checklist again for that. But projects that are already submitted, we're not going to be able to go back and get another bite of the project.
Yeah. And I see a hand up, but just to add, I mean, the idea around objective standards, the reason the legislature is kind of fixated on that concept is that for so long in a lot of parts of the state, agencies would set up the standards they wanted developers to follow, and then they would end up denying projects anyways, even if they complied with those, saying, well, you know, maybe you followed all of our standards, but we don't like what you're trying to do here. And the legislature is trying to eliminate that by saying you need to identify what your objective standards are, and if you don't have them, get them. And that's what you should be using to judge projects by. And I saw a hand up.
Steve?
Yeah, it's just a follow-up on an earlier question, which is that it seems to me that it would be in our interest as a streets commission to make sure that going forward that the checklist is as comprehensive as we could possibly make it to represent the objective standards that we would want to see in any multiple housing development, whether it's a single family with an ADU or a larger development. And I think we should agendize that as a review item going forward so that we can review it and take a look at things we might want to add. That was all I wanted.
Thank you, Steve. Stacy?
I have one question. Thank you for the presentation. With respect to the condition of approval, conditions of approval, focusing in on transportation, are there guidelines for us on what we can and can't do requesting conditions of approval to a project?
If the project complies with all of the objective standards that that are in place, and again, if something was missed in the consistency review, it's missed. But assuming that the project complies, you can condition so long as you're not effectively making the project infeasible for the developer, and so long as you're not reducing the density of the project. You can also condition in a way that is necessary to mitigate for an environmental impact. So I know that's kind of broad guidance and may not directly answer your question, but those are the parameters that we would have to be working within. For your commission, perhaps, although CEQA's changed when it comes to transportation, we're now looking at VMT rather than level of service. But that is, you know, when we're talking about transportation mitigations, it's through CEQA that we would generally be addressing those, I think. And so you'd have to, yeah, sorry.
Oh no, go finish.
I was basically done with my thought.
Okay. And just as a follow-up, is CEQA and VMT then the only area or categories of focus where we could add conditions of approval, or are there other areas where we could add conditions of approval? Let me give just a random example. Like if we don't have guidelines for how many bicycle parking spots we should have, or if our guidelines are too, you know, if we don't have guidelines and there's only BTA kind of recommendations and we feel we want to do more, can we make that a condition of approval? That's just one example. I don't want to.
So, okay. So when we talk about conditions of approval, one other qualification that's always been there, and this is a constitutional requirement, is that the condition has to be related to some impact, some special impact of the project. And the condition can't be any broader than is necessary to mitigate for that impact. So what I would say about adding bicycle spaces is, number one, that would be a good area for objective standards, rather than kind of imposing that on an ad hoc basis. That said, if there's something unique in particular about a project that might make it desirous to have more bicycle parking than your standard objective criteria, you can impose that based on that unique circumstance, provided that the result of that is not to lower the density of the project or to make the project infeasible. I'll add too that you know, most housing development projects in Los Altos, because of the inclusionary requirement, end up being density bonus projects. And so that is a way for developers to seek concessions and waivers, and that can include things like bicycle parking. And there just may be no way around that in the individual circumstances of the case. That might limit your discretion further. But again, I mean, so long as I would encourage objective standards around that, but if there is something truly unique about a project that warrants a higher standard, you have some discretion to do that, subject to density bonus and you know, the other limitations I talked about.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think I have the gist, and that was just a random example off the top of the head, but there could be other things specific on the street near the thing and the development and things like that that we can look at. Is what
Right.
that way.
And
Thank you, Stacy.
it's a good example.
Any
So-
questions?
That was just clarifying. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that-
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought so, but maybe I didn't understand that you were clarifying something. Could you? I apologize. Could you repeat what you said?
What I'm hearing in general is that we can request conditions of approval if it's related to the impact of the project. So take away, the bicycle parking, could be N number of things. For example, on the streets nearby, if there's particular, bicycle lane or other things that we would find would need or improvement.
Right. I mean, if there are general issues that you want to be able to deal with, again, I would stress the importance of having objective standards. But if there is something unique about the project that warrants mitigation, you generally can do that either as a mitigation under CEQA or if you're doing it in a way that doesn't violate the applicant's rights under the density bonus law or that doesn't lower the density or make the project infeasible. There's a lot of limitations on your ability to add conditions, but fundamentally what you said is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Cindy, any questions? Eric, thank you very much for being with us tonight. I just
Sure.
have a couple of questions. Jolie, you're raising your hand.
I thought you were having us sign off, so I was waving goodbye.
No, not yet, not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Just need a couple more minutes left. First question really is, I expect we're going to have more questions in the future. What resources would be open to us in case we need more clarifications? Would it be you? How would it work?
I think probably, and I'd invite staff to chime in, but I think if you reach out to your staff contact, they can work with our office to make sure your questions get answered. Marisa, do you have anything to add to that, or Jim?
Okay, great. So we'll make Marisa as our point of contact for any clarifications. And then the second and last question is for those combined planning commission plus complete streets commission meetings. How do we expect to figure out the logistics of these things? Is it going to be sort of trial by error, or how does it going to? What are the logistics of it?
Well, I'll let Jolie kind of chime in on that, but I mean, these are new laws, and we're muddling through with everybody else. That there is going to be some trial and error and some growing pains along the way. But Jolie, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just know that we do have a project that's coming forward, and I don't know the date. I know, I think it's coming through in July or August. So I think the logistics are going to be worked out through with Guido. I think Guido's going to be handling it. And virtual will be easier, but the in-person ones, we'll have 2 full commissions there. And that's a lot of people. And if everybody has just a couple of questions, you've got 14 people asking questions. So, but it's a learning process. We're going to figure it out, but we do want to try this because we know we're under those five hearings, and we know we want it to go through Complete Streets and Planning Commission. Those are critical commissions for these types of projects. So we'll try it, and I guess we'll just work it through, accommodate it as we go through. So
Yeah,
great.
It's by no means ideal, and I want to acknowledge that. But with the 5 hearing limit, really it's either that or not bring projects to all the commissions that we typically bring them to. So anyway, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's fine. I understand that. So I'm going to make echo what Steve said earlier. Let's make sure that both commissions are on the same page when it comes to the checklist and the objective standards. It would not be efficient or productive if we discover different set of standards in the meeting, in the joint meeting. Great. Well, thank you both for being with us tonight, and thank you for the clarifications.
Okay.
Actually, excuse me, I'm going to actually open it up for any questions from the audience. I neglected to do that. So any questions from the audience? I see Councilmember Weinberg raising your hand. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. On issue of objective standards, the council is currently in the process of having those drafted and approved. We've actually already had 1 study session on them, but the consultant went back to make some additional changes. I don't know when it's coming back to the council, but I would imagine it will come back within the next several months, at which time I would anticipate that we would go ahead and approve and adopt the objective standards. So if this commission wants to have a say, wants to give input on them, I would recommend that you look at them fairly quickly. And if you desire to give input, go ahead and give input as a commission. I will warn you that the objective standards are dense, they are complex. Well, let's just say that they're not very user-friendly. They're designed to be read by architects and planners. And I know the Planning Commission spent an awful lot of time with them already. But if this commission also wants to give input, then I would suggest that you take a look at it very quickly. And of course, that goes for members of the public as well.
Yeah, and Councilmember Weinberg, I know that there is the ordinance to adopt the objective standards. It has been drafted, and how the objective standards are attached and incorporated by reference. And I know it's at that point, but I'm not sure which meeting. I know we've got the meeting on the 13th, and I don't believe that they're on the 13th. They're not. I know I've got a lot of other things on the 13th, but
I don't recall seeing them on the tentative agenda, and my sense was that we were going to have another study session as well.
yeah,
There were
so
enough
that-
questions
yeah,
that were outstanding.
yeah.
But this commission should be aware that the Planning Commission is very familiar with them. They spent a lot of time giving input on them. So if you guys want to come up to their level, there's a lot of homework that's going to have to be put in. I don't think anyone is expecting you to be at their level, because that's what that commission's primary purpose really is. But again, the city is going to be adopting these objective standards sometime, I would think, after the summer break. So take a look at them, decide whether or not you want to discuss them as a commission, and give input before we take them up again.
Jim, I know that you also raised your hand on this topic.
Yeah, I was just thinking logistically, and maybe this is for an offline conversation, but in terms of having these combined meetings, something to think about would be maybe we pick one day a month that both commissions can actually meet, because this group meets on Wednesdays and Planning Commission meets on Thursdays, and so that's going to be tough, especially once we start meeting in person.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know what the mechanism is going to be, but I think we need to make sure that we chime in at least on the checklist. Historically, this commission has had very clear and very objective rather than subjective recommendations. And so to the extent that we're able to put our thoughts into that checklist, hopefully it should streamline the combined joint meetings. All right, so I'm going to actually see if anyone from the public wants to speak. I have one hand up. Mina, is this on this topic, on the item number 2? If it is, I'm going to give you 2 minutes.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. So I am an architect. I'm also a resident. And I think it's very important that our Streets Commission actually get on board with this, because the aim of SB 330 is to increase density of housing. And what that means, it's going to increase the number of vehicles. And so, as you're aware, that's going to change the character of our streets. And and most of these projects are going to get fast-tracked, because it seems to me any project that comes under SB 330 is going to go much faster than probably the normal projects like the single family residences, because all someone has to do is add an ADU and you get under SB 330, and that immediately impacts everyone. So I think it is very important that we look out for the safety of pedestrians, bicyclists, and figure out what's going on with the increased car traffic that's happening. So I highly urge all of us to get on board with this and make our objectives clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mina. All right, so with that, I'm going to conclude this session and leave it with Jim and Marissa to bring it back to us on how we can get the checklist and the objective standards seen by this commission. Great, thank you. With that, Eric and Jolie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So with that, we move to item number 3 on this list, which is the Foothill Expressway widening. Jaime, the floor is yours. I think before I do that, I'm gonna thank Mr. Freitas from the county for accepting our invitation and attending tonight's commission's meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll do a quick introduction on this item. The city of Los Altos helped fund the design phase of the Foothill Expressway widening project between San Antonio Road and El Monte. That happened sometime around 2016, 2017. And then the county was successful in helping kind of get funding for the construction of this project through the 2016 Measure B sales tax program that was passed by voters at that time. And so this was the first project that was built through the 2016 Measure B program. And following the construction, we did begin to receive a lot of input from residents that were expressing concerns regarding specifically bicycle safety along Foothill Expressway. The general kind of design philosophy that the county has been using for a while along Foothill, specifically through the majority of Los Altos, has been that there are no bike lane facilities formally designated by the county on Foothill Expressway. So there is a traditional what's called a delineate but not designate approach. And so the county in their design had not carried through bike facilities through the intersection. That's resulted in a lot of community concern that at this point has been validated by city staff with the sudden drop of bike lanes, or in this case, informal bike lanes, and then leaving bicyclists really to defend for themselves and kind of moving to a position they can safely move through the intersection. And so we asked the County of Santa Clara staff here. There are 3 people in the audience. I believe they're all here. The first is the director of the County of Santa Clara Roads and Airports Department, that is Harry Freitas. We also have Ananth Prasad, who serves by function, as I understand, as the County of Santa Clara's traffic engineer. And then we have, and I apologize, there's a third person, and Roselia Mack is the project engineer that's helping to oversee this project on behalf of the county. And so with that, I want to hand it over to the county staff to give a little bit of a presentation that really focuses on their approach towards the design of how this project was designed and built, towards their treatment of bicycle and pedestrian movements through the expressway. I'm sure they'll also cover some of the changes that may be happening down the line, but that were not available for this specific project. So with that, I'll hand it over. It sounds like, Harry, you're taking the first stab at the communication, so thanks for being here, and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. Harry Freitas, Director of Roads and Airports, Santa Clara County. I will turn it over to Roselia, who is going to get on the call, but we appreciate the opportunity to go over the project and explain what we built and take questions from the commission and the public. Thank you.
All right. I'm trying to share my screen. Oh, there we go. Okay. Can you all see my slide deck now?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I just want to say good evening, Chair and Commissioners and members of the public. As Harry mentioned, my name is Roselia Kamek, and I'm the project engineer for this project. And county staff just wanted to take this opportunity to give an overview of the project, step back at the beginning, and just talk about the origins and purposes of this project. As Jaime mentioned, it's a Measure B sales tax project. And Measure B was a measure approved by the voters, and the purposes behind Measure B were to provide congestion relief and safety improvements. This slide is a Google image from before the project, but it just shows you basically where the project is located, with San Antonio Road here and El Monte here. And then there's some post-project slides here that just show generally some intersection improvements and the median improvements. Okay, let's see, there we go. So some of the key elements that were part of this project for operation and safety improvements. For congestion relief, we have addition of an auxiliary lane in each direction and a second right turn lane from southbound Foothill into westbound El Monte. addition of a second through lane on Westbound Monte. Those all provide some congestion relief. We squared off corners and eliminated free right turns at all four legs of El Monte Avenue. And that does serve to provide a safer crossing for pedestrians because they have a shorter crosswalk. We also added pedestrian sensors, the latest technology that just makes a safer crossing opportunity for the pedestrians. And then we added in bike slots at San Antonio and El Monte. Just real briefly, wanted to go over the funding for this project. As we've talked about earlier, it was a Measure B Expressway project that provided most of the funding. The city of Los Altos contributed about $500,000. Then there's some additional tax funds, Transportation Development Act, which is another sales tax fund we get from the state for transportation projects. And then the gas tax funds provided some funding. So overall, the project was over $6.5 million. Just wanted to briefly go back over all the outreach for part of this project. There have been about 10 community meetings since the inception of the project where we've involved different community groups within Los Altos, City Council, Complete Streets Commission. We've had subsequent meetings with City Council about the construction progress and status. Wanted to go briefly over the project fund, some of the features of the project with more of a graphic display. This is showing some bike slots that were added along the road, and these included some bike detection loops which help with the bicycle safety. We widened the shoulders to provide a wider area on the shoulders, and we added auxiliary lanes on Foothill in both directions for congestion relief. Then at the intersection of El Monte, we added the two right turn lanes and phase the intersection. We added 2 westbound through lanes. We squared the 4 corners to provide safer pedestrian crossing. We added bike slots with bike detector loops at all 4 corners. And then we improved pedestrian safety with sensors and timing improvements. I just have some pictures of the post-project situation. This shows the afternoon commute with the cars stacking up in the 2 right turn lanes on Foothill. This shows the bike area along Foothill as it approaches El Monte, and then it's moving into the 2 right lanes here. Another picture of the El Monte intersection. Wanted to get to, yep, I missed this slide I was looking for. We did add some striping and signage post-construction that added some share the lane with the bikes slide picture, and I guess that fell out of my presentation. Oh, no, it was there. Must be. Sorry about that. I think I'm being blocked out by my panelist views here. Excuse my technical difficulties. All right, that's the picture I wanted to show, that we've added some share the road signage to help facilitate some of the bicycle movements. What I wanted to point out was that The project plans were developed to accommodate and address all the comments that we received during project planning, and that there was extensive coordination involved with stakeholders during project design. The project's been substantially completed, and we have done some modifications to the original signage and striping to help address some of the concerns. And what we would like to do moving forward is set up a community workshop with the stakeholders that have particular comments to make on the bicycle issues. And we'd like to work with city staff to set up that workshop. We're hoping to do that within the next 3 to 4 weeks. It's kind of our next steps.
Very well, thank you, Celia. So I'm going to actually invite the commissioners to have only clarification questions.
Okay.
Commissioner MBR, go ahead, please.
What is the striping on the on El Monte westbound after it crosses Foothill, where you have the 2 free rights at this point? What is the current on-street paint markings that helps to direct bikes around those 2 right turn lanes?
All right, if you give me a minute, I can see if I can pull up the actual.
And then my second follow-up question is what is the on-street marking for bikes that merge from the far right lane prior to the 2 right turns onto San Antonio? Are there green skips?
There are no green skips. As a matter, currently the county does not provide green skips as part of our striping. And your first question again, what was that? I'm sorry.
What is the on-street marking to guide bicyclists as they cross El Monte westbound and try to merge with the 2 right turning traffic coming off of Foothill southbound?
This is Anand Prasad with the county. I'll be happy to answer that. So in order to avoid any conflict with the 2 right turns, the double right turns that we have at the intersections are have a red arrow, means we do not allow right turns on red from that double right turn. So the vehicles, the bicycles that are crossing on El Monte will have not to, there will be no conflict with the right turn movements at all. When the Monte traffic has a green light, the right turns will have a right turn arrow. So there will be no conflicts.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions, clarification questions from the commission? Vice Chair.
I have a question. I know there was a community meeting.
We can't hear you very well, Stacey. Maybe you want to come closer.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just speak louder. I know there was the county in the presentation had said, Rosella, setting up a community meeting. Is that, what is the purpose of that community meeting? Is it to gather input, or will you be presenting updated designs based upon the feedback that we're getting in public comments tonight, and the feedback we've received in letters, and the feedback from the commission tonight, and the feedback you're getting from city staff? Sort of what is the purpose of that?
The purpose of the meeting is just to have a more open dialogue and to be able to hear directly from the community and have a working place. And it will give some time for us all to observe the situation and understand it better. We just completed construction fairly recently, and we like to have some observation time as well.
And then is the intention, after you do observation and have community meeting and gather more input, is the intention to then, based upon the observations and the community input, to take that and then make modifications to the design, what's in place now? Or, and if so, in sort of what time frame would you anticipate doing that?
I think modifications would be made based on input, and I'm not sure about the time frame, Anath. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, I think based on the discussions at the meeting and what modifications need to be, done, or what we come up with and what we agree on. So that'll probably take getting another contractor on board and then making any changes depending on what type of changes. If some changes can be done by our road maintenance, that can be done pretty quickly. If it's installing additional signs or some striping marks that we can do, that can be done. If it's anything different, then it all depends on, again, what the changes will be.
And my final question, if I look at the existing county bicycle guidelines, and I know we're in the process of updating them, but the existing ones talk about on an expressway that a city council needs to request any sort of changes. And then there's a process along the way. Anath and team, are you saying that you don't need that process to move along and make changes, or can you just, talk about that a little bit?
I think, if we're talking about the issues that have been raised currently with the bicycle community here, we are setting up a workshop. We are open to, listening to every possible suggestion, idea that they have, and see what works for us. And then we can then look at what needs to be done. If you're talking about, policy changes, that's a completely different issue where that would have to, take it to our board and update our policies and things like that. So again, it all depends on what the changes are, and if it's a modification to this current project to make some adjustments, we can do it without actually going any further.
But if it requires a policy change, is that something?
Casey, I'm going to keep it now for just clarification questions to what we have in front of us. We'll come back and discuss more on this project
more on this detail. Okay.
After we've had input from the members of the public.
Sure.
Any clarification questions from, and I'm going to actually request the members of the public, if you're not speaking, please turn your video off. Any other clarification questions from the commission? Okay, Mr. Owe, if I'm mispronouncing your name, forgive me. Please turn off your video if you're not speaking. I'll invite you to speak at the right time. Thank you. Very well. So I'm going to actually now, we have a strong attendance. I'm going to actually, we would like to see a show of hands from the public who would like to speak on this topic. Okay, we've got 3 requests so far. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. 4, Mr. Luhrmann. Okay, 5, 6. All right, so I think I'm gonna give 2 minutes to each speaker. So please be brief in your comments. Again, this is not a dialogue. You have the opportunity to speak and give your opinion and pose any questions, but we cannot answer back. So Mr. Fenton, go ahead, please, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm Jim Fenton. I'm a Los Altos resident and bicyclist and of course a motorist as well. I've read through the correspondence between the city and the county, and I think that the issues are quite well understood in terms of the difficulties getting through the intersection. So I think the city has expressed it well, and I appreciate the city's attention to this. I think a lot of the difficulty here has to do with the delineate but not designate policy. And really this applies in particular to this intersection, but actually all the way through Los Altos. Foothill Expressway should be designated as a bicycle route. The current policy, which basically gives kind of like tacit approval to bicycles to operate on Foothill, is really the opposite of a Vision Zero policy. What you want is you want both the drivers to be aware of the bicycles that are present, and you want the bicycles to be aware of what they should do, and how they should position themselves. And that's really lacking right now, and I think it's a dangerous situation that we have. It needs to be corrected quickly. I'd like to see more attention to the conflict zones in these intersections in particular. What I'd like the city to do is for the whatever process we need for, I guess, probably complete streets to request first, and then council to request that all of Foothill Expressway be designated as a bike route by the county, and that markings be added as needed. It's mostly a matter of paint, should not be a huge budgetary issue. I'd like the city to request that even if they are not sure that that's going to be approved. I don't want to have a chicken and egg sort of problem here where we're afraid to ask because we think it might be denied.
Jim, we're running out of time. Any last thoughts? Great, thank you.
That does it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chris Hobart. 2 minutes.
I can't start my video, sorry. So I'd like to state the problem as crisply as I can in 2 minutes. At rush hour, it will not be physically possible for bicyclists to cross the right turn lane within the indicated transition zone. This is not just my opinion. I go through that every day on both my bicycle and my car, and it's observed fact. Experienced cyclists will adapt to that by moving left outside the delineated transition zone as brakes and the traffic safely allow. Once they've done that, they will have two choices. They can ride to the left in the right turn lane to align with the slot at the intersection, but that invites drivers to pass them unsafely on the right. Or, as I've already seen many cyclists do, they may move left and take the lane, preventing cars from unsafely passing in the same lane. Either decision has two undesirable effects. It creates unpredictability, and traffic safety depends on the predictable behavior of motorists and bicyclists. And most importantly, it will antagonize motorists. At best, it will defeat the purpose of the expressway modifications in the first place to facilitate traffic turning right on El Monte or San Antonio. But at worst, it will induce road rage where motorists will choose to teach entitled cyclists a lesson. I just addressed what skilled, experienced cyclists will do. What I want to say, I've already seen one bewildered, inexperienced cyclist have to come to a complete stop where the shoulder ended, sitting there scratching her head, trying to figure out what to do. Either solution the city has already put forward, a protected class 4 or a class 2 bikeway with appropriate striping and signage, could solve the problems. But before that's done, the county and the city must agree that something needs to be done. So I'm hoping that the county is hearing these issues that are real lived experience. And I hope they're willing to consider doing something about it. And that includes, I agree with everything that Jim Fenton just said about the necessity of starting with a bicycle lane through the city. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mr. Harbor. Mr. Ludeman, you're next.
If I can get my video on here. There we go. Again, I have to say I agree completely with what the two previous people said. I often ride through that section. I must say when the construction was finished, I was looking forward to experiencing the greater safety because that was one of the items on the web page. And my first time through when there was almost no traffic at all, just absolutely astonished me, frightened me, to be frank. Since then, outside of rush hour with not very much traffic, I've been unsafely passed a couple of times by cars. I can't imagine what it would be like at rush hour. I have one time had to come to a stop off to the side when basically a bunch of cars were coming through from the stoplight. Again, I can't imagine how any cyclist, experienced or otherwise, would deal with that kind of situation. Last, I find the changes with the signage are quite inadequate. They're difficult to see. They're confusing to motorists. They're not going to understand what they mean. I also want to say that the pictures that have been shown are, I think, somewhat misleading. They don't look really bad, the pictures that were the photos that were taken. But if you actually get out there on a bicycle and you realize this is a death zone. That's all I can say. It's one of the most unsafe areas I've ridden. And basically, I just avoid that now. There are ways to get around it. They're not convenient, but that section. So, you know, if it's going to take you months and months to come up with a partial solution, I don't think that's going to be adequate. Somebody's going to get hurt or killed.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Great. Mr. Tim Ward, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my name is Tim Wee, actually pronounced W-E-E.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no worries. I am a bicycle instructor and a very experienced cyclist. I've cycled all over the world and especially around the United States, across the US twice. I myself am okay riding this section, but most people are not an expert cyclist like myself. I have to admit, I was very disappointed to see this particular development at this intersection because I ride through it quite a bit up and down. And I do think a much better bicycle solution is needed here. And I would really like to see Foothill made an excellent bike route for everyone of all abilities. So I do hope Los Altos makes a request to the county to improve this intersection. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Wee. Mr. Jonathan Bloom.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I had prepared extensive remarks, and I'm sure you'd be terribly disappointed that I'm not going to tell you what I was going to tell you, because I think the four speakers before me said it better than I would have said it, but I just want to say then that I agree completely with them that we do have a serious problem that requires additional changes to be made for a solution. And again, I just agree with the previous speaker, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Molly Cox, next.
Yeah, hi. I am a resident of Sunnyvale. About a month ago, when all the cones and markings were taken off, I rode through these two intersections. The first intersection at El Monte, going towards Palo Alto, there was a rider down. There was a big fire truck blocking the way so people couldn't hit him again, which didn't instill great, confidence in myself. Even if you're a good rider, we had a cyclist down. That was almost at San Antonio Road. So you had to go around the fire truck to get to the intersection to cross. So I had to kind of go into traffic, which didn't feel very safe. On the way back, I thought, oh, this is going to be better because they talked about traffic safety improvements. And going back, crossing those two right turn lanes, there's no marking showing drivers that bikes are coming across. And I think that's just ridiculous. So I almost saw a fatality my first day after they finished these so-called improvements. And I really don't think it's safe. I really think we need the green striping or something to show motorists that bikes are here and bikes need to cross those two right turn lanes. And I agree also that Foothill would be a great bicycle expressway. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Cox. I don't see any more requests to speak. This is your last chance. If you'd like to speak and you are a member of the public, this is your chance to raise your hand or turn your video on and show me some kind of indication that you'd like to speak. All right, Mr. Fitch, go ahead, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I would just like to echo all the other comments. I totally agree. It's like a war zone out there trying to get through there. And I would say that most of the time right now, it's not too bad. And the reason it's not is because it's so close to the pandemic, post-pandemic. We don't have a lot of cars, but there is a reason why they made 2 right turn lanes onto El Monte, and that is because, sooner than later, we're going to get cars backed up there quite a bit in both those lanes. And when that happens, it's going to be really difficult for cyclists to get through there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Fitch. Mr. Hanson, you're next.
I just wanted to second what other people have said about the city's summary of the situation. It's driving through it is complicated, and it's a complicated thing to explain exactly how it is, but the city statement on it is really accurate. I've been driving through, like when there's no traffic, it's okay. When there's a lot of traffic, it's sometimes been okay because it's really slow. sometimes at night when there's some traffic, it's super terrifying. So yeah, I hope too that the solution can be found to improve it.
Great, thank you, Mr. Hanson. Ms. Cox, if you could turn off your video, that'd be great. Any other questions from the public? This is your last chance. Going once. Either raise your hands and hit on the blue mark, or just turn on your video and show me your hand on the screen. Going twice. All right, I don't see any more requests. So with that, I'm going to close the section for input from the public. I'm going to bring it back to the commission for discussion, or perhaps any more questions that you want to get from the county. All right, so who wants to go first? Stacy, I know that you're itching.
Thank you, Chair. So I would say a couple of things. One, I think there has been a lot of community feedback on this, as well as feedback from staff, as well as previous requests from this commission about having more bicycle designation here and concern for cyclists. So I think it is a priority for us to work with the county collaboratively to address this immediately. This can't wait, until late 2022 when the updated bicycle guidelines are targeted to be done, and getting approval from the Board of Supervisors. I think it needs to move forward much faster. I'm not sure, I didn't hear any of the public speakers say that we needed another community meeting. I heard them say that this is a well understood problem. So I would like to see more action sooner. I do support the city and the council and this commission making a recommendation to the council to request of the county to designate Foothill Expressway as a bike lane as part of the bicycle guidelines update, with a sub request of this is a new project for Measure B, and given the changes in the double right turns and what has happened here for cyclists and what we've heard from the public speakers, is to move this portion forward faster and get changes in place, even if it's possible to do it before this current project is wrapped up with the same vendor, or just something so it's done more urgently because we're hearing it's not safe. So I think I'll wrap up there, but I do think that, as in the fall, when more workplaces go back, this is just going to be a more difficulty when the rainy season starts, when it's dark, in the evening rush hour. We're already hearing things like, war zones and serious problems and, cyclists down. So I want us to see us take action and work collaboratively with the county in a very expeditious manner.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Other commissioners? Commissioner Andial, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I believe the current design strands cyclists in the middle of Foothill Expressway, especially as you are going southbound on Foothill, having to merge across to the two right-hand turn lanes going westbound on El Monte. I would like to see the county, as Commissioner Banerjee said, designate Foothill Expressway with a formal bike lane and mark it as such. I'd like to see it increase any kind of reflective properties or visibility, especially at dusk and nighttime. This is an extraordinarily popular commute route at night. I commute at night on this road, and so it's very important that we have increased visibility at these two intersections, going northbound on Foothill, trying to cross before the merge onto San Antonio, and going southbound before cars turn right onto El Monte. This is high-speed traffic. People are going through this intersection at 50 miles per hour, and a bike stranded out in the middle is a dangerous thing. It's always been this tippity-tap dance, who goes first, on asking for a bike lane on Foothill. And I'm going to declare, let's go first. Los Altos wants this designated as a bike lane. We'd like to see green paint, green skips, and the full treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne, who wants to go next? Steve, go ahead, please. Unmute. You want to unmute, Steve?
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat what other members of the commission have said. The only thing that I'd say, I'm a little disappointed. I appreciate the county coming in to this meeting today, because I think it's really important and I think it's timely. What I'm disappointed is that what I haven't heard from the county is the recognition that it is a safety issue, given all the letters they've received, both from the council as well as our staff, and coming in with some kind of a proposal or alternative proposals as to what they might do to improve it. And I think that we don't have the leeway, I'm afraid, given the amount of bicycle traffic and vehicular traffic, to have an elongated process of doing more research. I think what we need is to get some of our experts, perhaps at the staff level, and the county together to quickly come up with, here are several approaches that can make this situation better. And I think we've heard a couple of them today from our commission members. And I just think we need to speed up the process and get something done.
Great, thank you, Steve. Suresh, you're unmuted. I presume you want to go next.
Yes, thanks. Again, I'm not going to repeat what others have said, and I think there are two issues. There's clearly the safety concern. I think the city recognizes it, and I think there's a significant public input already in terms of recognizing the fact that there are significant safety concerns. And I think, so my recommendation and request to the county is to quickly move forward with whatever it takes for that recognition, so we can start to talk about solutions. Yes, I think there's general, and including me, that there's general support for designation as a bike route and a bike lane on Foothill. But I think in order to get there, it seems like the safety concern needs to be quickly addressed and recognized, so we can kind of move forward with solutions. So my recommendation would be to maybe the next meeting would be actually come back with what those, some study and recommendations as to what we can do, that there is this is the recognition, this is a problem, and maybe these are the types of solutions we should look for in the short term, short of going for a full designation and whatever that might eventually lead to. So I guess what I'm really saying, I think, is just to echo everyone's concern, is why it's taken this long, or why it would take much longer to recognize the safety issues here. So, so I guess I'd really like to encourage you guys to get to that point as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Suresh. Cindy, Tom?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, great, thank you. So first, I want to start by, again, thanking the Director of Greatness and his team for being here tonight. I do have a few questions, really more than comments, a few questions. From what you've heard tonight from the Commission and the input from the public, do you feel that you have a good understanding of the concerns of this community?
Yeah, Harry Freitas here, responding to your question through the chair. Yeah, I mean, I think the community, we were pretty clear on the comments that we received, and we pretty well understand what we've been hearing about the intersection. I want you to, also please understand that we're operating a pretty high-speed roadway here, and it moves a tremendous amount of traffic. And that roadway takes a lot and a tremendous amount of traffic off Los Altos streets, and congestion was becoming a problem. We moved very carefully through this design and really worked with stakeholders. look, we all know that drawings they don't reflect what it really feels like. And that's why we're using the word workshop for our meeting with the community, because we feel that especially the bicyclists on this roadway are going to have a lot of opinions, and we don't want to just start really thinking that we've heard clearly all of the trade-offs necessary to make the intersection better. But I will have you know that we consider all forms of engineering as other professions a practice. And that means that we are never rigid in our designs, and we are always ready to modify them as conditions in the field, as the users of our facilities tell us that they have concerns. So we think it is very important to have a two-way conversation. The tendency of emails is what we call a one-way conversation. We really get the opinion of the person sending the email, and we've read them very carefully, but we have to have the conversation about what we would do instead. And then there's kind of a separate thing that we know has been out for a long time, and it has to do with bicyclists on expressways. We know a lot about when vehicles at these speeds contact pedestrians and bicycles, and we know a lot about the dangers of bicycles on these types of roadways. And what we've heard from today, very, very experienced bicyclists, I can tell just by the way they're talking. And when we designate routes, that's a public policy decision, and it applies to everybody from 8 to 80 in your community. Google will tell you, take this route. It's the best bicycle route. If you put it in your map, Waze, any type of mapping application will tell you, Foothill's the way to go. Well, I'm not sure, but that's a policy decision, and I think that the Los Altos City Council and the Board of Supervisors are going to have to weigh that very carefully. So my proposal is this: we have a workshop with all of the stakeholders, anybody who's interested, and we talk through this intersection. We figure out what we think the best solution is, and we implement those changes as quickly as we can, probably with our crews, because I don't think it's going to require curb, gutter, and sidewalk. That was what the original project was, to take those pork chops out and really improve safety. And those pork chops were very high-speed right turns, the pork chop islands that were here before. The second step is something that Los Altos is going to have to mull over, and that we're mulling over ourselves, and that's the role of the expressways in bicycle routes. And please understand that we take that conversation very seriously, and we're not simply hiding behind a policy or dismissing those proposals as a flip response. We have to really think long and hard about that. Appreciate the opportunity to address your commission, and thank you so much for your consideration in inviting us.
Thank you, Director. So I hear you, you want to have a two-way dialogue. What does it really mean? How is that going to work in the next few months?
Well, we'll have a workshop, and we're going to go over options for this intersection. And none of the options has a clear, regardless of what we've been talking about today, it's very difficult to analyze the striping plan and go over this via Zoom. We're going to have to get in a room and roll out the plans, talk about it, might even get out in the field. I don't know how it's all going to work, but it has to be a two-way conversation, and then we'll decide what we can do, considering our responsibility as the traffic engineers for this roadway. We're very open to trying to improve things to the best that we can accommodate on a roadway such as this.
Okay, so I'll take it then the county and your team will come back to the city with additional workshops where we can discuss solutions.
No, I think we can do this in one workshop with, we're going to invite the city staff to it. We're going to invite everybody who sent us an email. We'll certainly extend our invitation to your commission, and you can decide if you want to staff it in accordance with the Brown Act. And we'll do a workshop, and then we'll make some improvements. The second issue is not going to be solved at the workshop, and that's a designation. That's a different issue. That's a countywide issue. We're going to be talking about Capitol Expressway and Almaden Expressway. We're going to have to talk about the expressway system. So that's a little different issue for us. So that's our commitment, and we take that, really seriously, and we want to get on that right away. So we're looking forward to getting that going as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I agree. This is a second issue, a separate issue. What can the city of Los Altos do to help you in moving that second issue forward?
Well, that's something that we, the city of Los Altos is probably going to have to, kind of contemplate what it wants for its community too. I think that there's a lot of community members who may have opinions about that. The designation of a bike lane is a really important step. And, I'm not prepared to discuss some of the ins and outs of how that would work from a county policy standpoint today. What I'm focused on is El Monte and Foothill.
Very well. Thank you. Great. Well, thank you, Director and Anand and Lucilia for coming tonight.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So with that, Lucilia, if you could just stop sharing the screen, please. Great. Thank you. And I'm going to move then to item number 4 on the agenda, which is the Complete Streets Master Plan. And Jaime, I presume that's you?
Really quick, I just wanted to add a final note. I heard a lot of discussion on the prior item before you move off of it regarding some of the commissioner statements to request a potential bike lane on Foothill Expressway for a formal designation. And as Harry mentioned, that might be something that may be a larger countywide discussion. But if the commission or the city council did want to eventually consider such a letter of recommendation to the county staff, my only suggestion to you would be that a class 4 or class 2 bike lane is not good enough for Foothill Expressway. The bike lane type of designation you'll be seeing in the item coming up for the Complete Streets Master Plan is for Foothill Expressway to be designated as a class 4 protected bikeway with some type of vertical elements within a buffered space to really protect bicyclists and provide more of a delineation. And those are the types of treatments that if we sit down in a room with the county staff, those are the kinds of things that we're just going to say. There really is no other way for you to really fix the issues that were created on Foothill Expressway without the introduction of vertical delineation in some form, in the roadway on Foothill Expressway. It just has to happen. And I understand those will be things that may be new for the county. Those will be things that may be new for Los Altos. And we've had a lot of discussions with the community on different projects where they told us that they don't like vertical delineation, things such as vertical posts or K71 markers that we've seen on other projects. But along Foothill Expressway, I just can't think of another solution that would be feasible to fix some of the problems that we've been seeing and we've been hearing about, and we validated on our own as city staff, as a result of the current design of Foothill Expressway. So if I just wanted to clarify, if you as a commission do consider exploration of letters to the county or recommendations to the city council forward those to the county, that a class 2 bike lane is not a good enough designation. You really need to consider something more aggressive, like a class 4, and that's what you're going to be seeing in the upcoming discussions of the items later tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Jaime. I think that is something we should discuss at perhaps a future meeting. And for the time being, it sounds to me like the ball is in the county's court, and they need to come back to us, or at least they're saying they'll come back to us with a workshop and recommendations on how to make this intersection safer, or those 2 intersections safer. And if it turns out that the only way to make them safe is by making it an official bike lane, then so be it. That's the process it would take. But I think we as a commission, I agree with you, we ought to consider seriously how we study, or at least consider making that, or at least recommend making that section of Foothill Expressway as an official bike lane in a separate meeting.
Thank you, Chair. So with that, I'll just, I think we can then officially move off of the Foothill Expressway. I just wanted to get that final thought out before we officially close out. And I do also want to thank Harry and all the other staff from the county for being here tonight. And we definitely look forward to working with them on trying to come up with solutions that will hopefully work for the community to address their concerns on Foothill Expressway. Okay, and so with that, I'm going to start us on our next item. We are at a very critical phase on the development of our streets master plan. It affects not only streets like Foothill Expressway, but really all roadways within the city. And over the past several months, we've had a lot of discussions regarding, types of design concepts or concept plan line work that would be kind of visions for what streets could look like in the future. A lot of discussions around kind of safe routes to school, kind of what's the right kind of designation of roadways for, streets that the city wants to recommend students and parents can take to get to schools. We've had a lot of discussion about kind of our bicycle network, and based off our commission from the input, we've had a pretty good discussion regarding a vision of what we want our complete streets master plan to be, for the city to help us transform the community into a more walkable and bikeable environment. And as part of that process, we developed a set of ranking criteria for us to be able to allocate what are really going to be a limited amount of resources over the next several years to help build out the bike network. And we'll talk a little bit more about funding in the next item, which is a discussion on the upcoming CIP program that starts tomorrow in the fiscal year 2021-22. And so what you're going to be discussing tonight as part of the Complete Streets Master Plan. And if you don't mind giving me 1 second, I forgot to let Jeff Knoll know that his item is up. And so let me just send him a quick test that we are ready for you. And oh, he's here, great. Okay. And so yeah, tonight's item does include a discussion on the application of that ranking criteria that you developed as part of your visioning statement for the process against what we see as the recommended projects based out of the bicycle network that we discussed with you a couple of months ago. And so Jeff's going to walk you through a presentation tonight that looks at that proposed bike network, pedestrian network as well, and tries to apply a methodology for ranking projects for implementation over the next several years. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff, and I'll be here as well to answer any questions along the way. Jeff, it's all yours.
Great, thanks, Jaime. I'm going to share my screen. All right, thank you, Complete Streets Commissioner, Chair, Jeff Knowles, Alta Planning and Design. Excited to be with you once again, as we are moving through this process. Tonight's topic is to review revisions to the bicycle network. These are the revisions that we received from our last conversation and from emails that came in after that last meeting in May, and also provide feedback, share and then get feedback from you on our prioritization results. And these prioritization results flow from the criteria and the methodology that you set out when you established your vision and ranking criteria earlier on back in, I believe it was February. So just as a little update for the members of the public who are joining us, this is part of a 4-pronged strategy for creating a complete streets master plan. We're updating the former bicycle and pedestrian plan, merging them into one and updating them. We've developed concept plan line drawings that have gone out to the public for specific design considerations on certain streets and received feedback on those. We developed safe routes to school, walk and roll suggested maps for people and parents and students to use today, and also created improvement plans for school campus areas. And then finally, all this was undergirded by robust community engagement. So without further ado, the revised bikeway network recommendations based off of task force, CSC, and public input. I want to point out a few things for this group and walk you through them, because there have been some, I consider some rather substantial changes to the last time I presented this, and hopefully it's responding to feedback that you shared with me, and if not, you'll of course give us the opportunity to continue to refine. But there are 2 new categories that did not appear the last time I spoke. They're the study category, and that's on Los Altos Avenue and in the downtown on State and Main. And the reason that we added these categories is because of some really excellent comments that we heard from both the task force and from the Complete Streets Commission when we met, to think about Los Altos Avenue in particular as a parallel bicycle corridor, an alternative to San Antonio Road. We're not ready at this point in speaking with staff to go ahead and fully recommend a certain class for this roadway. And rather what we're going to do in the plan is to recommend the parameters of a study that the city could undertake, collecting data about parking utilization, about speeds, about traffic volumes, and going out and taking more precise measurements about what could fit there, and then communicating through a series of engagement meetings with residents about the benefits and trade-offs of what would have to happen is taking away parking to fit in a bike facility. We think it's a good idea. We think there are a lot of benefits to it, but we think it needs to be studied in more detail than we can give in this master plan. So that's why at this stage, we're recommending a corridor study. In the downtown, there was good conversation about converting State and Main to a one-way couplet, a one-way pair. Again, that needs to be looked at, a little more emphasis on traffic flow and circulation, data that we just don't have right now and are not able to make that determination. We think there are some benefits, we think there are some trade-offs to that, but that again needs to be a conversation. That was not included in the downtown vision plan. And so again, we didn't want to deviate from that without doing an additional study. So those are two areas, two departures in the last revisions. We think that there's good room for those to be studied. Additionally, we changed Foothill Expressway to a Class 4 recommendation. We heard you and the public loud and clear. There is not a comfortable way to accommodate average bicyclists interested but concerned on Foothill Expressway and make this great crosstown connector without a physical separation from motor vehicle traffic with those high speeds and high volumes. So that'll take some work, and I know that was an item that you were just talking about on Foothill Expressway, but that we think it will be the most transformative project that we can think of really to make the city more connected. We've upgraded Covington to a Class 2B, a buffered bike facility. It's currently a Class 3 bike route. This also responds to the desire to create cross-town connections that go across major arterials, going from the downtown to central and southern parts of the city. We've extended the Class 4 on Grant Road north all the way to the city limits. We've downgraded Monte, which was previously recommended as a Class 1. We've downgraded to a Class 2B, buffered bicycle lanes. We've done this because this has been a recommendation that's been out there for a long time and not made traction because of some of the feedback that the city has received from residents. And so there are areas where there is an existing Class 1 that could be enhanced, but we think the more important thing is to look at sidewalk connections and then buffered bike lanes that can make that connection north to south. We've upgraded the Class 2B on Fremont Avenue from Monte to Lisa Lane, and upgraded Eva Ave and Granger from Class 3s to Class 2s. Holt and Newcastle are safe routes to school corridors that have also been upgraded from Class 3s to Class 2s. We've added Class 2s on Cristo Rey Drive, another safe routes to school corridor that previously didn't have a recommendation, and extended Class 3s on Morton Ave and Arboretum Drive. In addition, I think there needs to be some discussion in the plan itself that goes beyond just this map here to talk about how the city should proceed when going out to designate and install Class 3 routes. And that would include the collection of data about vehicle speeds and vehicle volumes. And where it wasn't meeting certain goals that we could recommend, the city could then start to engage with the public around traffic calming that would be necessary in order to make a safe and comfortable facility where there isn't room for a bicycle lane, a designated bicycle lane. So that's something that we can talk about in the plan itself, about some processes or at least some data collection that would happen and design process with the community to make these Class 3s actually meaningful instead of just lines on this map. So those are the major challenges, major revisions that I wanted to point out on this, this revised map. And so I look forward to getting your feedback about that. But we took those revised this revised network that I just presented and ran it through the prioritization criteria. And just as a refresher, in case you don't recall from those previous discussions, we worked through a set of criteria that turn around, look at connectivity and access, and that's access to major employers, to transit, to the downtown, to retail areas, parks. We looked at safe routes to school and access to school sites. We looked at projects that had community identified need. We looked at projects that provided more comfort, and that's in terms of physical separation from motor vehicle traffic. We looked at feasibility. Higher scoring projects are ones that the city can do more immediately and at lower cost. Safety, projects that are at historically known crash sites. And then equity, and this is in terms of mode equity. So projects that really are complete street projects that serve people walking as well as bicycling or using micromobility devices. And so projects that serve multiple different modes scored higher in this category. I think this group is very familiar, but for members of the public that are joining us, I should have maybe shown this earlier, but there are multiple different bike facility types that are part of your network. You've got class 1 shared use paths. Those are completely off street, separated from vehicle traffic, and the facility is shared between bicyclists and pedestrians. There are class 2 bicycle lanes and buffered bicycle lanes. The difference between these is that it's just paint on the ground, but it's a dedicated space for bicyclists. Class 2 buffered lanes have a little separation between motor vehicles and the bicycle lane. Class 3 are bicycle routes, where bicyclists share the road with motor vehicles, and these are typically only used on low volume, low speed residential streets. And then finally, class 4, they're separated bikeways for the exclusive use of bicyclists with a physical separation between motor vehicles and the bike facility. So with that, I want to walk through the high priority projects that came out of this first round, this preliminary round of prioritization. There were 2 class 1s that scored at the highest level, and I'll just mention the methodology that we used was you really could cut these at many different levels in the score. I mean, everything was scored from a 105 all the way down to, I think maybe there were some that didn't score at all. What I did was picked out the top 10%, and I said that the top 10% of these categories were the high priority projects. But again, I'm looking for feedback about projects that maybe didn't score in that higher bucket that maybe deserve to in your mind. So keep that in mind as I go through this. San Antonio, from Edith to Almond, that's the project that I talked about last time we met. That's the connection from downtown to the class 4 that will be soon installed on Almond and connecting to Los Altos High School. And then Carmel Terrace, another safe route to school connection from Altamede to Portland. High priority bike projects that are class 2 bike lanes are on Newcastle, A Street, and Main Street. And then buffered bike lanes on Covington from Fremont to Grant, and Miramonte from Portland to Fremont, which is basically the city boundaries. Class 4 projects, 4 of them scored in the high bucket, high priority bucket. Foothill from Edith to St. Joseph, El Monte from Hardin to Foothill, El Camino Real throughout the city border, which is a concept plan line drawing that you've seen and commented on, and Grant Road from Covington to El Sereno. There are a number of class 3 projects that also scored in the high priority bucket. These are on Edith in the downtown, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, B Street, which we talked about in Loyola Corners, Dolores, Jordan, State, and Whitney. So it's a lot to digest, and I know you're still kind of getting up to speed on this, but let me keep moving on, and then we'll open it up for clarifying questions and get your feedback. So we also scored all of the, I think we're up to in upper 50s, maybe the low 60s, don't have the right number in front of me, but I think the number is 64, different spot improvements. So these are intersection improvements for the benefit of pedestrians and bicyclists, along with pedestrian walkway improvements. Just a reminder, there are 2 categories of walkway improvements. There are new sidewalks and walkways, and then enhancements, major maintenance and enhancements to your existing dedicated walkways. And so all those are also scored. So in your high priority pedestrian walkway projects, 2 enhancements came to the top on San Antonio Road from Almond to El Camino, and El Camino Real basically along the city's borders. 3 new dedicated walkways rose to the top on Jordan, San Antonio Road, and Sherwood Avenue. Then I think 11 high priority spot improvements rose to the top. Those are on San Antonio. 3 of them are on San Antonio Road, 2 on Monte, Main Street and Foothill Expressway, another on San Antonio Road, several on Foothill Expressway, San Antonio Drive and Sherwood, Edith and 4th, which I think came up. I'm not sure if it was a task force member or a member of this body that talked about that in our last conversation about the importance of that. And actually it did score very well and rose to the top. And then 1st and Main Street. So most of them are in the downtown. I'll just go back to this. I've added in the blue where these high priority spot improvements are located. So again, you can see on San Antonio Road gets a number of them, a good number in the downtown and on the periphery of downtown. So those connections into the downtown. Loyola Corners, and then crossing at Foothill Expressway. There are 2 on those. So just to put them side by side, again, this is the revised bike network map, and then this is the revised and prioritized spot improvements and pedestrian walkway improvements. And so with that, I want to thank you again for all the feedback that you've given. Encourage everybody who's on the call to join us on LosAltosCompleteStreets.com if you've not engaged with us. All of our online tools are still available, and we're collecting feedback on the revised network and these lists. So with that, I conclude my presentation. Turn it back to you, Chair.
Actually, Chair, before we hand it back to you, I just want to take one more note here too. I wanted to thank the Complete Streets Master Plan Task Force members. I forgot to mention that at the start of the meeting. They actually saw this exact same presentation a couple of days ago. They met a total of 4 times since the start of the year. And a lot of the recommendations that you've seen delivered to the commission over the past 4 or 5 months were actually recommendations that were helped to be developed and advised by the task force. So that was a really great body of a group of people that we had helping us develop these recommendations that you're seeing here tonight. And they are going to still, we give them an opportunity to provide us more feedback over the next week. We'll be doing the same for you tonight as well. And so just a quick note, because this is a lot of information to absorb, we did want to note that we want to take your feedback tonight if you do have some preliminary thoughts, but also any of the commissioners that see things that might jump out to them later over the next few days, feel free to email me or email Marisa, and then we'll consolidate all of the commission input and all the task force member input and pass that along to Jeff and the Alta team next week. So with that, we'll hand it over back to you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Jaime, and thank you, Jeff. This is superb. So let's get any clarification questions from the commission. Steve, you're muted.
Thank you, Nadeem. This is a quick question for, I guess, Jaime and a consultant. The priorities are sprinkled with a bunch of improvements for Foothill Expressway and Foothill Expressway intersections. I think it was very clear in the earlier presentation that the county has jurisdiction and the city doesn't for the improvements to Foothill Expressway. What's the implication of having that in the master plan for the city?
Thank you for asking that question. That's actually a really good question. So the city can request to make recommendations along Foothill Expressway or along El Camino Rail or any other roadway that's operated and maintained by a different agency. We would basically submit an encroachment permit to do those improvements if they were not in conflict with any type of other policies or thoughts that the county staff might have. And so with that, this is a planning document. It's meant to help us develop a vision for what we want in the city. And then anything that gets built out of it becomes an individual project. And that's a really important distinction for people to recognize. There are certain things that we can do as a lumped group of projects. And a good example might be to say, hey, we want to focus in certain neighborhoods of the city and maybe do like neighborhood-wide bike route share and signage type programs. An individual street wouldn't be looked at on its own. It'd be looked at as a larger body. But a larger project like a focused intersection improvement at Foothill Expressway or any other location in the city would be an individual project that would go through a specific planning design, community engagement, and then ultimately construction process. So having a vision of what we want to see at locations along Foothill Expressway lets us go through that planning process, invite the county to participate in that process with us, figure out what investments we're willing to make as a city on our own, potentially advance projects through to a design phase so that we then pursue additional grant funding. So having recommendations on facilities that are not operated and maintained by Los Altos is still a very good recommendation for the city to have so that we can properly engage other agencies to work with us to help build the vision that we're looking for in the community.
So just as a follow-up to that, I think as a commission, we can understand that. I think that the general population of Los Altos looking at the master plan wouldn't understand that level of subtle detail. And I'm wondering if in the master plan, it makes sense to carve that out, to have just a reference to the fact that these are high priority projects that the county controls, that we would like to see them do, so that anybody reading the master plan would understand that it's not under the city's purview to just go ahead, fund it, and do it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but typically within these bicycle pedestrian transportation plans, we don't just have the network map and leave it alone. There typically is a follow-up description, maybe for not all of the projects, but for specifically for all the high priority projects. And in those descriptions for things along corridors like Foothill Expressway or El Camino, we would very clearly identify for a future reader that this is a corridor that is operated and maintained by a different agency, that their kind of involvement and ultimate buy-in would be required, so for those improvements to get built on that facility. And so anything that's related to Foothill Expressway that's a high ranking priority would have that clarification in the write-up.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Is that right, Jeff? I want to make sure I didn't misspeak.
What we would typically do, what I've done is just note that we'll have some sort of table of all of the projects, and we'll just asterisk or italicize the ones that require multi-jurisdictional coordination and have a note about it. So yeah, it's a point well taken, and we'll make sure that that's clear.
Thank you. Other clarification questions? Cindy.
Hi. One quick thing is I think I noticed in the staff report and Alta, we have slightly different percentages that we're using for the ranking. I think, I can't really remember which one was the one that we landed on, but I think we updated them at some point. So perhaps Jeff has the most updated version, but just wanted to point that out. Because I think we updated it to increase the top 2 and also bump up equity to 10. In the staff notes, I think it has the original version.
I'll take responsibility for that error. I did just copy the prior note, so definitely use Jeff's numbers.
Okay. And then just to like spot check how you applied the criteria, can we use an example like the Granger and Loyola and talk through why that would score lower?
Are you
and then I'm asking because I think I'm not sure because it lists what the project ID is, so I don't know if there was a background associated with that project, but in my mind that is sort of a connection point to Loyola Corners, and so I'm wondering if there were other criteria that made it lower.
Commissioner Yang, is that a spot improvement location?
Oh, sorry. No, was it? Let me see. That was just yeah, spot improvement.
Can you give me that ID number and I can help you identify that?
It is 4.
Thank you. Okay, Granger and Loyola Avenue. That did. It did did not score on many of the criteria that we set out. So let me look into this real quick. Bear with me.
And this is
So
mostly like,
yeah.
it's mostly so we can get a sense for like how our own criteria that we set is being applied and working.
Right. So for example, we're looking at connectivity and access. And so we're looking at things that are connecting to or within very, very close proximity to some of the, to a couple different things, right? Within 250 feet, so within basically that intersection, would it touch trail, park, library, community center, downtown, El Camino Real? Those were our criteria that we looked at, along with any new and planned development sites within the city. And so that's what we did to score on those. And so it was not in close proximity to any of those. We did not include Foothill Expressway as part of that criteria because El Camino Real has more of the retail, I think, shopping along with downtown. So it didn't score on that connectivity and access.
Yeah, I was more pointing out that
good.
We must not have Loyola Corners as like a shopping area as a.
I think it's because it's across Foothill Expressway that it's still beyond the 250 feet that we're looking at. And that's why there was, I believe, yeah, number 52. You see number 52 did score. And so, for example, Monte and A Street got that point and did very well. That, yeah, basically it got a score of 3. It's got a score of a 60 once you weighted it. So 60, it was the, you know, 4th highest score in the, out of all the placements. So it's, again, letting the computer, we have to let the computer do some of this work for us. So if we started to expand out, we could start to think about it. It would just mean more projects would be able to get that score versus the ones that are really located right in the heart of those retail areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. It does. Thank you.
It's a fine, you know, it's arbitrary. It is arbitrary at this point, but we have to start making a cut somehow. And so this was the way that we did that. It's a pretty tight, sort of, I guess, radius around the locations.
Okay. I have a couple other ones, but I will ask over email.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Other questions, clarification questions? All right. Stacy?
Thank you. And thank you, Jeff and team, for the work on this and incorporating our feedback into the scoring criteria and some of the changes that you made. Really appreciate that. I have 2 questions. When I look at our interactive map where we were collecting community feedback, there's a good bit of feedback about Foothill Expressway and Foothill Boulevard near 280 and Homestead Road. Are we making any recommendations over there? Because I'm not seeing it on our recommendation maps.
And not for spots. The thing that got added in late, it's kind of in that area, would be the Cristo Rey Drive bike improvement.
Yeah, so Cristo Rey is added in, but what about Foothill Boulevard and Foothill Expressway between Cristo Rey and Homestead Road?
I don't believe it's your jurisdiction.
But just as Foothill Expressway isn't our jurisdiction, that's kind of in the same category.
Yeah, I think it would be in conflict with the Cupertino bicycle plan at that point. So we could look into it. It's something that,
if you can look into that, because I think some of that is Cupertino, some of that is us, and some of that is the county. I think there's like 3 jurisdictions there, and I think you know, we need to have an opinion on what's there, and it needs to kind of handshake with what the other opinions are.
Stacy, just to bring up one other thing that we didn't really point out during the presentation, but I just want to make a quick note. So there's still a little bit of floating input that needs to kind of get added into the proposed network from the public interactive map that you're referencing on the project's webpage. We also wrapped up our own internal review with Alta on all of the walk and roll maps about a week ago, and that input was delayed because we were really waiting to hear what input we were receiving from parents and school administrators from Los Altos School District. We got some, but very, very limited amount of public input from parents and the school administrators. So we gave a whole bunch of extra input to add extra kind of bicycle routes or bike lane routes along other corridors that aren't shown on this map yet. They'll all get consolidated a little bit later. So there might be some little tweaks, you know, to the proposed network that you aren't seeing. I just wanted to make that note that, you know, we did make additional staff recommendations that just aren't shown here yet because we did it as part of our walk and roll map update, and that it just was done too late by the time Jeff and his team went through all of their ranking process. But yeah, there'll be minor tweaks, but I don't anticipate major changes.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we'll look forward to those. I think that area I mentioned will not really be a school route because it's kind of at a border between, you know, which middle schools and high schools and elementary schools flow which way. There's like flowing one way and the other way. But I do see on the interactive map quite a bit of feedback from some cyclists. So thank you for, I know you're making updates and you're still looking at interactive map. My second and last question is, I do like our scoring criteria. I'm just trying to think out loud a little bit about our scoring criteria. Will just, you know, I don't know, Jeff, you're running it through the database, and, you know, certain things rise to the top based upon our criteria, and that makes sense because that's what we outlaid. But what it's not doing for us is sort of a vision of, okay, we want to work on this route first because it's our north-south to downtown. We want to work on this route first because it's headed to Mountain View. We want to work on this route because it's part of a master school plan. We might just end up with a segment here and then a segment way over there and then a segment up there. And so when we prioritize with just the scoring, which I really like the criteria, how do the pieces of the puzzle fit together?
Once we get feedback from this group about those individual projects that are in your high priority, I think we can start to put together, you know, a suite of projects that could look at the class 1 from Los Altos High School to downtown, and then thinking about Covington Road as the connection there. And we can start to think about how do we knit these separate facilities together to make that longer corridor. This is what Cupertino did, and they've got, it's called I'm just going to say the Loop, I think, and that's their vision for knitting together all of their high priority projects together in a kind of a continuous network. And they're just starting to build that out. Ragnar Creek is part of that, and they're just, you know, working piecemeal around that. So there's two different ways that cities have gone about doing this. You can focus on projects based off of your funding availability and feasibility and getting projects done, and it will have benefit for those local residents getting to nearby destinations, and that's fine, and you can do that, and eventually over time you build out a good robust network. Or we can start to think about which of these projects score well and also have, you know, adjacency to each other that makes this bigger whole. And so that's something we could also look at. I think honestly, making a big concerted push on Foothill Expressway and Covington, and then a good look at doing that study on Los Altos Ave will get quite a few residents connected into your downtown if you think about that as a hub. And then you work on class 3s and 2s as part of your safe routes to school routes that can be done kind of in the same time. But I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah,
you know,
that's great,
we've
Jeff.
been working on kind of running this through. So yeah, if there's other ideas, I'm really open to thinking, hey, Jeff, this is a project that scored medium, but we think it has more value when you look at it as a connection to another piece that we might have missed. So that's feedback I'd love to hear.
Appreciate that. And I appreciate your openness to feedback. And I appreciate that you're well aware of the Cupertino plan, because I feel they've done a nice job with how the different priority projects fit together, and then they're making something, you know, a whole segment. And then when they present it to the community, it kind of makes sense. Those of us here in this meeting, we're down in the weeds, you know, every month. But if you present it broader to the community, and the Cupertino plan is nice. So I'm glad you're aware of that. Not that ours, you know, needs to precisely be just like theirs, but glad you're aware of it and kind of thinking about it as you put ours together. So thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Suresh.
Thanks, Chair. Jeff, I think I'm sort of following up on what both Stacy was saying and Cindy were saying. Is there a way to visualize this from different criteria perspectives? So I guess, you know, you have an algorithm, you're running through the algorithm, but I guess from a higher level perspective, is there a way to say, okay, you know, if you take this criteria, these are the projects that make sense, or for this criteria, these projects make sense, because that a view of that sort will probably help us make decisions, some of those micro decisions, I guess, better, or to give us a better sense of how the ranking happens. Because right now you're kind of clubbing everything together and says this is the rank, but I don't think it's giving us a little bit more insight into, or the data is not, I guess the insight's not, you know, there's something missing from the way we would visualize this, or help us make some of those micro decisions, I guess. I'm not sure how, because we're not kind of into the weeds into how the algorithm works, but maybe for you to think about how we can visualize this in a way that helps us make that decision would help.
There is a lot open to judgment call about the crosstown connection, which is part of your criteria, that I've not really quite touched. And so that's something where I could come up with kind of what I think most makes sense of linking these individual projects together, which I think I've heard from this group a couple of times is probably the most important visionary idea. The thing that's needed the most is these cross-town routes. And so I could come back to this group with kind of that network idea in mind, the high priority network routes.
Yeah, I guess. So if we just take only just you know, I would assume that certain class of for example, if you take the bike network, certain class of bike use, for example, if you take the class ones and see what they connect, I mean, are those projects then supporting some of our high priority criteria, right? This is kind of where I'm going with this. That also will give you a sense for, okay, if we do these major projects, then we have at least a base network or a base loop that's in place, both from north, south, east, west perspective, right? So then that'll help us then say, okay, let's lay something else on top of that to say then the next level of criteria, does that make sense? I'm guessing that the algorithm somehow filters those projects up to the top, but I think having a view like what you were saying will help.
Great.
Thank you, Suresh. I'm listening to Suresh, and I'm listening to the algorithm, and I'm thinking our next Complete Streets Master Plan would have a machine learning, artificial intelligence engine running through it. I won't be on the commission probably by then. All right, so I think with that, I'm going to open it up to the members of the public to provide us with their questions or inputs. Okay, Bodwe, I hope that's not your name or I'm mispronouncing it.
Yes, that's my name. Good evening, commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Harry Bodwe, a resident of Carmel Terrace. The residents of Carmel Terrace strongly oppose a Class 1 shared use path on our street. One of the reasons is that the path would cross 15 driveway entrances in a distance of about 1,000 feet. This creates a high chance of motorist crossflows from residents entering and exiting their driveways. In the presentation of facility types that we just saw, an important fact was omitted. The definition of shared use path omitted another factor that is present in the Streets and Highways Code definition. That factor is with cross flows by motorists minimized. A Class 1 shared use path for Carmel Terrace does not minimize cross flows by motorists. So I request that you remove the proposed Class 1 shared use path for Carmel Terrace from the bikeway and pedestrian maps, and please replace it with a sidewalk gap closure, which was previously agreed to by the City Council, and a Class 3 bike route. Our neighborhood would also be receptive to a bike boulevard with traffic calming. In fact, our neighborhood had proposed bike boulevards to the city several years ago, but our request was never acted on. If I have a little more time, I also just want to point out, your bikeway map shows a green line for an existing Class 1 path through the core campus of Block School. The city does not have jurisdiction over Block School over LASD property. Has LASD agreed to that designation?
Great.
Thank you.
Mr. Bodwe. Wadler. You're next, 3 minutes.
Hang on 1 second. Sorry. I'm a league cycling instructor. I've been teaching bike safety over 20 years. I'm a road commissioner, VTA Bicycle Advisory Committee member. And I just want to make a comment on your bicycle network map over there. You have a Class 4 bike, protected bike lane. There is no such thing as a Class 4 protected bike lane. It is a Class 4 protected bike way. There is a legal difference. The difference is a Class 4 protected bike way, a bicyclist is not required to ride in it. He may ride outside of it. And I want to caution against the knee-jerk reaction that the only place a bicyclist is safe is in a protected bikeway. There are ways to make bicyclists safe without going into the protected bikeways. Europe has found out that the number of crashes at the intersections has increased where there are protected bikeways. And I'm not saying I'm against them 100%. I am, though, against them that are poorly designed. If you look at San Jose, San Fernando Street, their bikeway, they have it right next to the bus lane. So pedestrians have got to cross the bikeway to get on and off the buses. That's a bad design. So I haven't seen what your design is going to look like, but definitely if you're going to go protected bikeways, they need to be designed well. And that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Wadler. Bev, you're next, 3 minutes.
Hello, good evening to the Complete Streets Commission staff and Mr. Knowles. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you for all the work that you are doing for the city of Los Altos. My name is Beverly Shengale Yolton and I live on Carmel Terrace. The draft of the new Complete Streets Master Plan is proposing a Class 1 shared use path for Carmel Terrace. This was proposed before, and at that time, the residents on Carmel Terrace were opposed to it. The sentiment on Carmel Terrace from both new and longtime residents is that we do not want a Class 1 shared use path. We see the need for the sidewalk gap closure as well as sharrows on the road. The no drop-off signs for Block students has had a great impact on the reduction of cars dropping off at the back of Block School and keeps the bikers and walkers safe on Carmel Terrace. Carmel Terrace has always been listed as a safe route to bike and or walk to Block School. Carmel Terrace has never been considered to be an official drop-off spot by cars for Block students. The Block school website has always stated that drop-offs are for the front of Block and only on Covington. A Class 1 shared use path does not seem to be the right classification for our street. Carmel Terrace is a very curvy street that is narrow, and in some parts, it is extremely narrow, and it is sloping downward from Portland to Altamont. The driveways are a single width driveway for one cars. Cars having to back up into a street over a Class 1 shared use path seems unsafe. The majority of the residents on both sides of Carmel Terrace park in the street. There are also several multi-generational families on the street, so there are several households with more than 2 cars per household. I thought that there was already an understanding with the city of Los Altos and that the sidewalk gap closure would be completed and we would be designated a Class 3 bike route with sharrows added on the street. I would like you to consider to amend the proposed Class 1 bike shared use path for Carmel Terrace and to designate our street a Class 3 bike route. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Bev. Carol, you're next, 3 minutes. Carol, can you hear me? Carol, you have your raised hand. If you could just turn on your video and unmute.
Okay. Is that right?
Yes, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Carol Commendatory. I live on Carmel Terrace. I've lived there for 43 years. And we've agreed as a street that we would like to have regular biking on the street, and it's been a path to schools, and it's been safe all these years the way it's been. Class 1 bike path, as Harry and Bev mentioned, would be dangerous with the driveways coming across, people backing out of their driveways going to work at between 7:30 and 8:15 when the children are going to school would be a very dangerous thing. Also, the bike path would make our street very narrow, dangerous for cars to drive on and garbage trucks and trucks to be driving on. It also would probably have to have all the trees removed on one side of the street and not allow for people to park on that side of the street. The people that live on the end of the street don't have a garage, most of them, so they need to park on the street. So this is a big problem for them. So overall, we would, as a street, we've been working on this for a number of years. We'd like to see it with just sharing the road with bikes and cars, and it's been safe and no accidents have happened, and it's worked out great. And it is not a entrance for a block as far as the drop off. It's not been made for that, so it should not be allowed. Okay, thank you for all your work, and I hope you could understand me talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Dalit, you're next.
Yes, hi, thank you. So my name is Dalit. We live in 1240 Carmel Terrace for 5 years now. We have 4 kids who go to Los Altos schools, and we're very happy to live here. I appreciate all the work that you put into improving our life here in Los Altos, but I have a big concern that what you are suggesting in our street is not an improvement, but actually a safety hazard. The nature of this street is that this is a very short and curvy street. Many of the lots here have a narrow driveway, which can allow only one car to park. So the rest of the cars will have to park on the street, which means that my kids, when they get dropped off, picked up, it happens many times a day. I guess you can imagine that with 4 kids, we'll have to cross the street every time they're being dropped off or picked up, or if we bring things from the store or anything. I have a huge concern that you don't consider our safety here as residents of the street. I would like to mention that my kids go to Block School, to Oak School, to Mountain View High School. I don't see any problem with biking or walking. I see that this is all working very well. There are 0 accidents on this street, and I just don't understand why you put us under a risk if there is no problem right now. So I would appreciate just continuing the sidewalk, allowing the kids to keep on walking the same path they walk right now, and keep our safety aligned with the kids, with the school kids' safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalit. Anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? Okay, so with that, I'm going to bring it back to the commission for final comments or feedback to Alta. Okay. I don't see any raised hands. Suresh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just had a recommendation to Jaime and Jeff to basically possibly put everything into, update the CSMP packet. Seems like there may be some discrepancy between some of the scoring criteria, I think that Commissioner Cindy was saying, and also I think Jaime, you said that there may be some updates to the maps based on inputs. So I would suggest that create a new packet with all the updates and so on before we provide any final comments and recommendations. That would be very useful.
Okay, thank you. Cindy?
I just wanted to reiterate things that we said before. One is thank you. It's so great to see you put in all of this work to score these projects and individual pieces based off of what we had all aligned on as priorities and what those criteria were. So it was really awesome to see. Thank you for putting in that effort. I did want to, I think the reason why I was asking those individual questions around like certain pieces, certain segments is like, if you drill down and look at the individual segments on a line-by-line basis and look at where they fall in terms of their scoring, you don't get the picture of how do they connect to other pieces, or how do they help us complete, certain priority corridors or projects, or how they connect to that. And so I think I second our vice chair's comment around like, once we get past this phase in the report, it would be great to see like the recommendation for how would we approach these, so that even like for certain things that like might be in the middle of the priority, if they're right next to or connected to other pieces that are high priority, how do we piece that together so that we can better kind of target certain projects so that we're completing segments together instead of piecemeal here and there. I think that would be helpful to see. And even if we are completing them piecemeal, at least we can see, how they're connected to each other.
Thank you, Cindy. Other comments to Jeff and Jaime? Suzanne, Stacy, no? Tom, Steve? Great. So Jeff and Jaime, thank you very much. A lot of rigor here. I'm going to encourage you to take into account the feedback that you got from the residents tonight and incorporate that into your analysis. And then I want to say this is great. I love the rigor that goes into it. And now you're going to do the sanity check in terms of connectivity, as you heard from Cindy and Stacy. But also, I think as you begin to draft the documents, and you are probably quite ways into drafting the documents, I would recommend that there's a section at the beginning that explains the rationale behind it, how we got to where we are. Sort of for someone who's not seen this before, someone who's going to read the document for the first time, to follow the logic, follow the rationale behind the prioritization and how we got to where we are. And at the end, to the extent that you can put an appendix, and there's a lot of analysis that you've done. And I don't know how we're going to capture that into some kind of a reposit that would help someone in the future. If we have a new member of the staff who joins Los Altos and a few years down the line, and he or she wants to go back and sort of see how did you get there, for them to follow the path and understand how was the data collected or analyzed. And then the last request that I have for you, if possible at all, is if we could quantify 3 aspects, or perhaps 2 aspects of this plan. And that is, how many miles of bikeable lanes would we have? And how many miles would we have of walkable paths? I mean, we quantify all the time how many miles of drivable roads we have on the streets every day. But I think it would be good for this plan to sort of say, we're going to go from X miles to Y miles for each category of transportation here. At least that would give some sense to all the residents of what we look at in terms of progress. And I think the bikeable stuff is clearly visible now because green is sinking in as being the color of biking. And so I think the more green color people see, the more they feel like there's bike lane somewhere. But I want to thank you for the rigor, and I look forward to see more of that document. One last question. You know, when this document gets, maybe this is a question to Council Member Weinberg. When this document gets approved by the City Council, what does it really mean officially? What does that sort of becomes official city plan policy? What is the implication of that document?
I can try to answer that question, Chair, unless Councilmember Weinberg wants to step in. But yes, once the City Council does approve specifically the bicycle and pedestrian element of the Complete Streets Master Plan, that does become our official planning document. Eventually, it does feed into any general plan updates that the city does move forward with thereafter. And it does become kind of the primary document that we use to help allocate our funding, you know, for future capital improvement projects. So this is not a plan that will sit on the shelf. It is a plan that will have a significant impact in the development of policy and use of funding by the city over the next several years. Hopefully a lot more so than happened with prior versions of the plan before this. But I think, you know, I'm hoping that you recognize that the commission level that we've been really going out of our way at a staff level over the past couple of years to truly try and change that practice, that old practice the city had. And this document was really needed to make sure that we were building out a vision that was appropriate for the community, that had a lot of good policy input, and that would serve the community well over time. But with that, I did want to just, before we move off the topic here of this item, I did want to specifically respond to the residents that were here from Carmel Terrace. I want to thank them for being here tonight and giving us their feedback. We will go ahead and make a modification to our proposed bike network because I think the feedback was really well spoken from the residents here tonight. We are going to make a change to remove the multi-use pathway along the portion of Carmel Terrace, put that back as a class 3, but also show it as a sidewalk gap closure within the pedestrian portion of the build out. And that is it. Again, that will keep it consistent with really what I think the ultimate vision was of having a multi-use path anyway. And then, but more importantly, it aligns with the funding commitments the city had made in the past. And I think does a better job of trying to clarify to the community what our intent was, which really was just that connection of the sidewalk and introduction of bike facilities if possible. But we will make that designation. Just want to put that out there for those residents to know that we heard them tonight. That's the purpose of this community meeting process. It's what we've been trying to express to residents the whole time. Come to these meetings, tell us what your input is, and we are listening. We will make adjustments, and that is an adjustment that we can promise to make to the residents living on and along Carmel Terrace tonight. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Chair.
Great. I'm actually, if Jonathan Weinberg would like to comment some more, the floor is yours, Councilman.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Jaime, for that. What Jaime said, of course, is correct, and I don't have much to add to it. Our master plans can all be found on the city's website. There's a page that has the city's charter, and the charter is divided into a number of elements, 7 or 8 of them. One of them being the housing element, which of course is going through a revision over the next year as part of the RENA process. Then of course we have our Complete Streets Master Plan. The city is also in the process of updating its climate action plan. There is a parks plan. It's not a master plan, but we will probably be developing one in the near future. And I would encourage all of you and anyone else who is in this meeting to go ahead, search for that page on the website and take a look at all the plans that we have. And the city does go to these plans when there is an issue as to what project should be prioritized or what's the bigger picture here. I'm looking at a potential improvement on this one street, but why are we going to improve this one street? Why are we going to put a class 2 or a class 3 bike lane here? How does it fit in with everything else that's going on in the city? I think it is staff that looks at these plans more than anyone else, but they are available to the public. And when council has a question about the bigger picture, we go to these plans.
Thank you. Great. So with that, I'm gonna actually, we got one more major item on the agenda. I'm gonna just keep plowing through so we can.
Sorry, Chair, I could use a break.
All right, okay. All right, let's take a 5-minute break. It is 8:17. Let's convene back at 8:22.
Thanks for your comments, commissioners. Appreciate it. Good to see you all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for being here. Appreciate it.
All right, can we resume the meeting? Commissioners? 8:22.
Ready at staff.
All right. I don't see the rest of the commissioners.
While we're waiting, I gotta say I'm super impressed because we are actually on track to be done by 9 p.m.
I know, I know. I'm doing my best, Heidi.
My wife and my kids, thank you.
And we actually covered a lot of stuff tonight too.
Yeah, I was super surprised. It's good.
So in my previous company, actually, for execs who came to my meeting and who were late, they had to put $1 into the pot. And then surprisingly, the pot grew rapidly the first couple of weeks, and then it just stopped growing after that. Everybody showed up on time.
It's good.
So maybe I should I don't have that luxury here, but that's not a bad idea to just put a pot for those who are late. Okay. Okay, I think we are back on track and we have quorum again. I see at least 4 commissioners. Okay, so let's resume our commission's meeting tonight, June 30, and move to item number 5, the CIP update.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go ahead and cover this item for tonight.
Now, the transpiration, was that your idea or was that Jim's idea? I want to know who was thought about the transpiration of their CIP update.
I'm sorry, say that one more time, Chair. I didn't hear that.
The title on the agenda says transpiration CIP.
Yeah. Transpiration. Yeah, I saw that.
And I was wondering who thought about that title.
I'll check it with Gaku on that one for next time. All right.
Let's get ready to transpire.
All right, okay. Time, you go for it.
Thank you very much. Let me just get my presentation started. Give me 1 second. And as a confirmation, can you confirm that you're seeing my screen?
Yes, we do.
Great.
Oh, we're going to spend it on transportation instead. Okay, that makes more sense.
Yes, that would be great. Okay, so tonight's item is an update on the Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, for anyone watching at home not familiar with the acronym. And we're going to specifically talk about the new fiscal year CIP program, which actually starts tomorrow on July 1st. So as a quick background for the commission and for the people watching at home, the city operates on a 2-year operating budget and capital improvement program budget. The operating budget funds general fund activities at the city, like community center services, police services, fire services. A lot of city staff time is on the operating budget. But when it comes to infrastructure improvements, those typically fall under the capital improvement program, or CIP bucket. And the city does a 2-year CIP, but they only fund 1 year of that at a time. And even within the 1 year, not all the projects are funded because staff only has so much capacity and capabilities to deliver a certain amount of projects. So the budget is actually funded even below even all the projects identified in the first year, and are prioritized depending on available funding and staff resources. The City Council just approved the CIP and operating budgets for the fiscal year 2021-2022. Again, that start tomorrow, just last week at their last City Council meeting. And one of the things that was discussed as part of that budget process is that there is an anticipated $3.2 million deficit, in revenues that were anticipated, due to impacts from the COVID environment and reduction in sales taxes. And so there are potentially some projects that will be deferred, and I'm going to highlight some of those projects for you at the end of the meeting. Tonight, what we're going to do is kind of focus specifically on just the transportation CIP projects of that new budget. There are a lot of other elements within the capital budgets for facilities or other types of infrastructure, such as like utilities. But in this specific presentation tonight, we're only going to focus on the newly or actively funded transportation CIP projects. And really going to try and show you how we think those projects are in alignment with what our city council's priorities, as well as some of the Complete Streets Master Plan recommendations that you just saw in the prior item. Okay, so with that, I'm going to show you projects in categories. You know, one of the big changes in the CIP compared to prior years was the amount of funding that the city council is putting forward for our street maintenance program. The city previously allocated around $1.9 million in street maintenance funds. That includes slurry seal or microsurface sealing work, or street reconstruction through major rehab, and then any other signage and striping work that came along with that program. And we started making changes about 2 years ago, where we started aligning our pavement maintenance program with what we were trying to build out with our Complete Streets Master Plan and existing bike plan at the time. And in the new CIP budget, the city's actually allocating a total of $3.5 million. So it's a total of $1.6 million more per year than what the city previously allocated. So when we're talking about making major changes, you know, around the city at a fast pace, you know, for some of the recommendations in the bike plan, it's actually going to be our pavement program that is going to be our #1 catalyst to actually quickly implement bike projects and pedestrian projects recommended out of the CSMP. And so that is a major significant change. And some of the other projects are ADA improvements. Now that's for improvements that are American Disabilities Act to make the streets more accessible to people with disabilities, such as or in a wheelchair or visually impaired, whatever the case may be. And we haven't specifically set up a project for the use of the ADA improvements for next year. But one of the things that we are looking into, if we don't do more sidewalk repairs or curb ramps, we are looking at potentially just deploying more accessible pedestrian signal equipment around the city. So that would be the equipment that tells you, you know, it's the walk is on to cross the street, as an example, after you push the button. We're also looking at doing more of those push buttons that signals that where you're just going to wave your hand, and that also lets you actuate the traffic signal as a pedestrian. The pavement rehabilitation project along Fremont Avenue was also recently awarded, just at the last week also, and that's a major complete streets project for us. In addition to just the major street repairs, we're going to end up with some really nice wide buffered bike lanes along Fremont Avenue between Grant Road down to Stevens Creek at the Sunnyvale border. Diamond Court, I'm going to skip over just because I don't know the full background with that project. And this next group of projects I'm going to go over really focuses on the bicycle and pedestrian portions of the CIP. The first project is our concrete repair. That's to do repairs of sidewalks for pedestrian improvements. And one of the things that we're going to do with the second project there, our traffic sign replacement project, is in the coming fiscal year, we're going to do a brand new inventory of all of our street signs in the city. We'll do what's in accompany with that, what's called a retro reflectivity study to figure out like what's the conditions of all the signs, so we can GPS kind of code them along with our mapping network in the city, and then be able to rank priority replacements based off the signs that are in the worst condition and by sign type. So let's say we do all the warning signs together, all the regulatory signs together, all the guide signs together, you know, things like that. We are reducing the amount of money that we typically put forward for our traffic calming programs. Those are the third and fourth projects this year on this list. The neighborhood traffic management CIP, as a reminder, is the CIP that the city sets up so that if a residential local street comes together to request traffic calming improvements, we go through a larger engagement process with them, and we agree that we're going to put on, say, speed humps as an improvement. The city would typically pay 50% of those improvements, and the residents would be expected to pay the other 50%. There are no projects currently in that program, nor have there been in the last few years. So we're reducing the amount to $25,000 and just having some money there in case there is a need to do some response to resident input. The fourth program there is the larger the fourth program is being able to do studies as needed in response to resident requests for things like a new traffic signal study or an always stop study, things like that. The fifth project is the Collector Street program, the complement to the neighborhood project that I talked about 2 projects ago. That's, as an example, how we did all the Cuesta Avenue traffic calming improvements about a year ago. The El Monte sidewalk gap closure project is actually closer to 95% complete. If you haven't had a chance to drive out there, for you, any of the commissioners or people watching at home, I strongly encourage you to go visit that street. It's looking really good. All that's missing right now is just some minor signage work, along with the rubber islands that are being placed into the buffered zones that separate out the bicycle and pedestrian pathways along vehicle traffic. So a really good example of what we're hoping future complete street projects in the city can look like, but that project is on schedule for completion kind of early the next week or two. Carmel Terrace is a project that we heard a lot about in the prior item. The city did leave $100,000 in the CIP for next fiscal year. And that's to advance the design, assuming that this project ranks well through the Complete Streets Master Plan process. And you saw the prior example, it was actually the number 1 ranked project, whether we did it as a sidewalk gap closure project or as we're now proposing, or if it had remained Class 1 trail, that was also originally recommended before we made the change at the end. So that's a project that will advance into design this coming fiscal year. University of Millerton is a prior CIP that was deferred in the last 2 funding cycles of the CIP. And I don't recall what the ranking for that was, but I know that it wasn't high. So it will be something that we need to look at as a commission and that staff in discussing whether or not we want to advance that project forward as we're looking at the other ranking in the implementation of the CSMP. This is another significant change for bicycle and pedestrian improvements in Los Altos. We've had an annual bike and pedestrian improvement program. That's the first project that you see there. And it actually has a lot of money in it. It's got a little over $800,000. But we can only build so much per year as a city because of the limited staff resources that we have. So because of the $3.2 million funding shortfall, there is a consideration to not remove, but defer 500,000, not 500,000 of that for a minimum of 6 months and move forward immediately. It's about $336,000. And then as funding shortfalls are closed or we see more revenue, whatever happens over the next 6 months, then that $500,000 can come back. So it's not something that has been a firm commitment yet. I just want to point out that the city is looking at trying to identify where it could potentially defer funding for not a whole year, but maybe 6 months, to 9 months, while we wait for funding shortfalls to close over with sales tax revenues and then advance more projects. But that will be one of the bigger pots of money that we use to advance projects out of the CSMP. The Fremont Avenue pedestrian bridge rehab is currently under design. So that project that's underway. We are getting ready to wrap up the design of all the flashing crosswalks along San Antonio that have been burnt out for about a year now and get that out to bid before the end of summer. And the other big item here is the second to last project that I'm showing. That's the additional $300,000 that the city council put forward for us to implement the school frontage improvement as part of the school improvement maps out of the Complete Streets Master Plan. So as a reminder, for every school in Los Altos, we looked at the frontages of the streets that lead to the school and identified a specific amount of improvements that are really signage and striping related. And then we have enough money here in this fiscal year. We're asking for another $200,000 next year. And that would bring $500,000 total to be able to implement all those frontage improvements, as well as any other input that we're getting from residents through the interactive online map tool as part of the Complete Streets Master Plan website. So with that, that's the main CIP projects. We've also got a few other projects that are going on that are not specific CIP projects on their own that we thought would be of interest to you. We are in the process of just getting ready to wrap up all of the traffic signal modification improvements at San Antonio and Almond. Those are the signal improvements that complement the two-way cycle track that will be coming in along Almond Avenue between San Antonio to the frontage of Los Altos High School. And if you haven't had a chance to drive out towards San Antonio, you'll start to see new bicycle signals being constructed. They're going to be bagged until July 8th, and July 8th is our target turn-on date to turn on those bicycle signals at the intersection, and then we'll follow, if not the same day, shortly after with the green, the remaining green paint along Almond Avenue to complete the cycle track facility. We also just finished the hardware installation of our first count station. This is a image sensor based bicycle and pedestrian count station that will look at the two-way cycle track on Almond Avenue to be able to count 24/7 the bicycle and pedestrian activity along with vehicular movements. And we're looking at a couple of other sites in Los Altos where we'll do similar type count stations to serve as models to collect data citywide around suggested routes to school. Lastly, I did want to highlight that we had heard a lot of input from residents in the St. Joseph Avenue area. There were concerns about sign changes that were made about a year ago for signs that kind of were referencing to motorists that they should turn back towards Cristo Rey Drive to get access to Rancho San Antonio. We made those sign changes to put new signs that read what the old signs used to say, and we just put those in a couple of weeks ago. So if you didn't know or hadn't had a chance to get out towards St. Joseph Avenue, we did complete those sign changes about 2 weeks ago. So with that, that's the end of my report. Again, this is just an informational only item. But if you do have any questions on any of the projects, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Jaime. So as usual, any questions?
Yeah, I got a question. So Jaime, on first page there's like you listed as number 4. It's 01013. Did you say that residents will have to share the cost of any improvements on that street for that item?
Sure. So for what you're asking about is what's called our annual neighborhood traffic management program. So this is a long-standing policy the city has had for traffic calming improvements on residential streets. So not collector streets like Cuesta, but like use an example. Let's say Arboleda, which is the street that's just to the west of Cuesta Drive. If Arboleda were to have come on their own and requested the speed humps that they got as part of the Cuesta Drive project, we would have gone through a community outreach process with just them for just their street. And if the residents had voted to support the installation of a treatment like a speed hump, yes, residents have to come together and everybody has to pay a fair share towards half of the cost of whatever those speed humps cost. So if there's if there's an improvement that let's say costs $5,000, one speed hump, the city would pay $2,500. The residents would have to come up with the other $2,500. So if there's 25 households, everybody has to pay their $100 share towards that speed hump construction.
So even if you were to vote against it, you would still have to pay it, and is that assessed then through your property taxes?
I don't know what the city's billing process has been in the past. I know they would send invoices, and if they don't pay, there is definitely the path of putting a lien on a home when it's sold to recover that cost. I don't know if any city's ever done that, but that would be the likely way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Stacy?
I'm not sure I have questions or just some points, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's actually just follow the process. Let's just keep it questions for now. I think this is an easy one. Hopefully. Other questions? Jaime is laughing. Maybe I should make it more difficult.
Okay, so I'll make it more difficult. I'll turn one of my points into questions. I was just trying to do it quick. So in terms of a quarterly update, what about Cuesta? Where are we at with Cuesta? I know we had it on our agenda recently, and there was a lot of feedback from the community, and I keep hearing people asking about it from the public.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I was planning on giving you an update during our staff updates at the next item, but this is a great place to do it. I'll do it again at the next item as well. So when we had our last discussion at the commission level, I think it's been about 2 months since we gave you an update on Questa Drive. We did commit to making some immediate improvements along Questa Drive. The immediate improvements that we're looking to implement, which by the way, we just approved temporary markings from a contractor just today, as a matter of fact. And the signage and stripe improvements that I'm going to discuss will go in over the next couple of weeks. But we are adding in the extra kind of down arrows, at each side of the speed table along Questa Drive. We had previously installed 2 signs at each speed table, 1 sign that faces each direction of travel. That's a speed hump, 15 miles per hour. We're actually adding a second set of signs on the same poles, but on the backside of the existing signs, so that when you're driving towards the hump or the speed table, you see 2 signs, 1 on each side of the street, really to help kind of improve the visibility of the speed tables. That was one of the big things that we heard a lot of concerns about at the commission meeting. And so we're adding in those down arrows, we're adding in the extra signs, and we're also adding a line across the roadway on each approach of the hump to help provide a visual kind of delineation that you're going to be kind of going up a table. That is the third element that we're getting ready to build. We had mentioned a couple months ago when we talked about this that we were just waiting for a striping contractor to get on board and get the work done. It's the same contractor that's been doing all the work along El Monte and Covington and along Almond Avenue. It's the same contractor doing all the work, so he's just getting over to make those improvements sometime over the next 2 weeks. So over mid-July, those should be completed. So we're going to make those immediate signage striping repairs, do additional observations, and then we'll make a determination if we need to look at any other physical changes to the existing speed tables along Questa Drive, but that determination has not been made yet.
Great, thank you, Harvey. Other questions, especially in relationship to the CIP? All right, so with that, I'm going to actually see if there are any questions from the audience. Any comments or thoughts from the members of the public? All right, Bev, 3 minutes.
Hi, I just wanted to get clarification of when the Carmel Terrace sidewalk gap, the 100K, is that scheduled? I didn't catch what you'd said. Is it for the 2020-23 year? Or it might have to be postponed because of the financial concerns with revenue from the city?
No, there's no delay for that. So the overall project for the Carmel Terrace sidewalk gap closure was estimated at about $350,000. $100,000 of that to kind of go through the design, going through the right-of-way investigations, the survey work that has to be done to complete a design, and then we were assuming about $250,000 would be what was needed to construct that kind of section of sidewalk between Portland Avenue to where the existing sidewalk ends that leads to Block School. And so what we're doing is in this upcoming fiscal year, that starts tomorrow, July 1st, 2021, we will advance or put together a bid package to hire a design consultant to do all that survey work and design, go help kind of guide us through a community design process with residents living on and along Carmel Terrace. And we would expect that kind of solicitation process, or what's called a request for proposals, to hire a design consultant along with the design process and the engagement process to take several months to a year total. And so then we would ask the city council for the additional $250,000 to build it in the following fiscal year, 22-23.
And if I may, Jaime, Jim Sandoval, Director of Engineering, the 250 was actually originally in the budget, but that construction portion was deferred to help with the deficit. And since most of the fiscal year was going to be about design anyway, we didn't see that there would be an impact. The council is going to review the revenue of the CIP from the general fund at the mid-year review in January, February, and if revenues are better than projected, then some of these deferred projects could come online earlier.
Thank you, Jim. Any other comments from the public?
Thank you very much.
All right, I don't see any more hands going up. So any final comments to Jim and Jaime and Marisa? All right, Casey.
Thank you. I have two. The first one is requests. In the next quarterly update, could we also get updates on any planning related transportation CIP projects? So one example of what's always on my mind is the first streetscape. Another thing to request for the next version of the quarterly report is an update on the data collection model that we sort of established. How are we doing on data collection? What's the data telling us? And I don't know if that needs to be part of every quarterly report or if it's a biannual or annual, but so we could just get regular updates on that. And then my second point, and this is a really important point, I know that you have in the CIP that Foothill Expressway widening by 280. I think as a commission and as a city, we need to take a leadership role and kind of look at what's going on overall down there. There's a whole bunch of agencies all running their own separate projects, and they're all abutting each other, but none of them are designing to be contiguous from one project to the other. So one project is Caltrans Measure B project on the 280 off-ramp, which I think is complete, and I think it would have been nice if we had more input with that along with the county. I think Caltrans is doing bicycle pedestrian safety improvements along there along Foothill where their off ramps come in. I have no idea the status of that. Then there's this 280 project that you have listed in the future for the CIP. And then there's the Homestead Corridor Safe Routes to School project. And these are all separate agencies running them, or even separate teams within separate agencies. And nobody is looking at the overarching plan of how all this works together down there. I'm not saying we're the people who have to run the overarching, but we have to at least raise our hands because this is our area, and let everybody know who's running these projects that we want to see that looked at. So I'll sort of defer to our chair, but I hope I have support on this. And maybe we need to make a mechanism of, asking our staff to do some outreach, or at some point if we need to send a letter to someone or whatever it might be.
Stacey, you're stealing all my thunder tonight because every project you just talked about is in my staff report update that's coming up in about another 5 minutes. So.
All right, okay. We'll wait until the staff reports in. Other comments from other commissioners? Okay, I actually have one small request. I know that you guys have a lot of stuff on your plate, so I don't want to keep finding more stuff on you, but something to keep in the back of your mind in relationship to the CIP. And that is, if we could just get some kind of updates or information on the budgeting going forward. I know that it's fluid. I know that the numbers are changing depending on the stimulus checks, depending on the economy. But I think if we can come back and get some kind of, perhaps maybe it's the Financing Commission or the city CFO could come and give us some 5-10 minute briefing on to where the city sees the budget going forwards and the timing for the various cash flow issues that we're talking about. So we can calibrate our expectations on the CIP, right? Actually, I see Councilmember Weinberg's hand is up. So Jonathan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This is timely because I think it addresses a point that you just raised. One thing that I would like the Commission to be aware of is, even though Council has approved the budget and we have approved CIPs for the upcoming fiscal year, the ARP, the American Recovery Act money is coming in more slowly than we had anticipated. So the Council did vote to put a hold, a 6-month hold on CIP projects that can be put on a hold. That doesn't mean they are not going forward. That doesn't mean that money has not been appropriated for them. But in an abundance of caution, because that ARP money is coming in more slowly than we thought, the Council wanted to make sure that we weren't digging ourselves a hole. And my personal belief is that we have a responsible budget, and every project that has been approved for this fiscal year will be moving forward, including the ones that Jaime walked us all through. But that's sort of the current state of things. We don't want to start spending money until we know that we have the money, and of course we know how we can spend that money. The council also wanted to put a hold on things because sometime in August, we anticipate that the county will let us know how much money we should expect at the end of the year in terms of our share of property taxes. And this is not a red flag. It's not that anyone is worried that we're going to be getting in less money than staff anticipates. In fact, staff was very, very conservative and cautious in the numbers that they put together. But again, we didn't want to start spending money and committing to projects until we knew that the money was going to be there. We're taking as conservative and fiscally responsible an approach as we possibly can. Now, if the Recovery Act money comes in quickly, or the county lets us know, hey, you're gonna be getting more money than you originally thought, we can lift that 6-month moratorium early. Fingers crossed, that's what we're going to do. But if someone asks, hey, how come you're not starting projects that you had already, that council had already approved, the money had been approved for and allocated, that's the reason why. That's the reason that there's a little bit of a holdup, because again, we do want to make sure that all the money is there.
Yeah, superb, and thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. So I'm going to build more on that one back to my request, which I think sort of, it makes it even more important in my view that we get some kind of a presentation from the city that highlights the opportunities and the risks when it comes to the budget. And I think it's not that we're questioning the decisions that the city is making, but more about how we get calibrated in terms of timing and priorities. So for example, if we see that there's risk for further delays beyond 6 months, I think from a commission standpoint, that means we need to rethink the priorities in the short term and then highlight something else that we need to be thinking about that doesn't necessarily consume as much money. So we need to go sort of be calibrated. We need to be in tune with the opportunities and the risks when it comes to budgetary items. And to that extent, if we're able to sort of have an update from maybe your CFO, maybe we don't have a CFO at this point in time, but someone who's handling the finances, and give us a 5 to 15 minute presentation, so to say, and here's where we are, these are the risks, these are the opportunities, and then for us then to sort of take that calibration and digest it. Great. Thank you. Great. With that, my goodness, I think we've got 5 minutes left if I can meet my 9 o'clock limit to go through the staff reports. Jaime.
Thank you, Chairs. I have several items. I'll try to rush through them as quickly as possible. I already mentioned the prior item, the El Monte sidewalk gap closure construction, but I did want to encourage, again, residents and all the commissioners and to if you can, make an effort to swing out by El Monte Avenue, check out the improvements we are making between Grant Road and Almond Avenue. I think those improvements are looking really good, and we spent a little extra money and delayed the project by doing a slurry seal of the roadway so that we gave people a nice looking project, and I think it's looking really good. Please swing by, and I'd love to get your thoughts if you have any, if you want to email me on your own. I'd love to get that.
I have, and we've got a lot of good feedback from many folks who've done it.
Great, thank you. I also mentioned the prior item, again, one of the prior items, we are wrapping up traffic signal modifications at Almond and San Antonio. Those are part of the Almond Avenue cycle track improvements. Those improvements will be complete around July 8th. And as a reminder, because there was concerns about bicycle accessibility through the intersection, we're using video detection technology that's going to activate dynamic no right turn signs to motorists so that bicyclists can move through the intersection and avoid right turn conflicts. Maybe something we can consider with Foothill Expressway, by the way, if we like what we see there. Quested Drive, I did mention previously, but I wanted to highlight for residents that might be watching at home that we are making a series of signage and striping based improvements at all of the 5 speed tables along Quested Drive between Springer and El Monte, and those improvements should be done hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I did want to let the commission know that we had a really good community meeting about 2 weeks ago, actually I should say last week, along El Camino Real. We're trying to solicit input from residents and business owners regarding the opportunities to help to partner with CalTrans to install bike lanes through the city limits and El Camino Real. We had about a dozen people participating in the meeting, including a couple of the commissioners that were here tonight. And all of the feedback for the most part was really positive. People really supportive of the bike lanes going in, even if it meant parking removal. We only really had one speaker with expressing some concerns about a loss of parking. And that was a business owner in Mountain View at the Zombie Runner Coffee. But other than that, the feedback was really positive. And so we're hoping to return that item to you in July for a look at the environmental documents and for you to consider a recommendation to the city council to forward a recommendation to CalTrans to put all those bike lanes as part of their project next year. I did want to also mention that the VTA is the lead for the Homestead Road Safe Routes to School program. That's going to be a multi-jurisdiction project that's looking at building capital improvements along Hempstead Road between Foothill Expressway, including in Los Altos, portions of Vineyard Drive, and go all the way across to Homestead High School on the Sunnyvale side of things. And so the VTA was initially scheduled to start coordination meetings with all of the city agency staff around the end of June, but due to the shootings that they had at their courtyard, they deferred that out until probably around mid-July. But more recently, our new transportation services manager will be the spearhead contact for the city with the VTA and those are the agencies on that project starting later this month. Lastly, we did just wrap up a citywide data collection effort. It's the follow-up to the citywide data collection effort that we did in 2019. We just got the data yesterday, so we're starting to format the data, and it's going to take us probably some time to move through that. But I do hope that when the next time we have a quarterly update with you guys, we can start to show you some of that data, and then we'll also be making updates to our traffic model that relies on that data as well. So with that, that's the end of the project updates that I wanted to provide to you. Jim, did you have any other items you wanted to share at a staff level?
No, I'm good. Jonathan covered well what I was going to say about the budget, and then we'll engage likely John Maginot to come to one of our next two meetings to present on the budget. He's been acting as the finance director.
Great, thank you. If there are no questions to Jaime on this topic, I'm going to move forward to the commissioner's reports. All right, I see nobody shaking heads. Okay, I'm going to take that there are none for this month. And we move to future agenda items. Again, things that are not in our work plan, but are important enough that we should consider them going forward.
Chair, thank you. Based on our conversation tonight's meeting, I would like to see that checklist. Have that brought before our commission as soon as possible. I would also like to raise the issue of the general plan housing element. I know that we had talked many times about what kind of ordinances can we change or influence as it pertains to additional development and the impact upon traffic, especially in dense corridors. So I think that's something that we need to take a look at. If we have an opportunity to influence, now would be an appropriate time to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. As a matter of fact, on this particular topic, I am tempted to have a subcommittee, and I'm certainly open to ideas here, to work directly with staff in relationship to SB 330 and then sort of see what is it that we as a commission need to do to be more efficient. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the background, so any input here on that would be welcome. Jim, if you have any thoughts on this, of course, I would welcome them.
Sure. Not offhand. I could meet with Guido and we can kind of put something together on that, some ideas.
Yeah, thank you. I know there's going to be a lot of fly by night here for the next couple of meetings or perhaps a couple of months in terms of understanding the process. So I want to make sure that we're not necessarily always waiting for the next commission meeting to think through it. And so I'll let you come back with a recommendation, Jim, right?
Okay.
Great. And with that, any other items that we ought to think about for future agendas? Okay, thank you all. We are 2 minutes behind. Okay, stop. Okay, rewind. All right, Jaime.
I was just waving good night.
Oh, sorry.
I think Suzanne has her finger up, so that's more of a.
I have one quick question for staff, Jim, perhaps, or Jaime, or maybe Jonathan. As we return to normal, when will the city be signaling a return to in-person meetings? Is that something that you project to happen in the fall, or will the city approach a more conservative stance and perhaps wait until winter? Thank you.
For staff, the plan is to return to the office kind of on a hybrid schedule between mid-August and the end of August, and that's yet to be determined. And we're probably looking at something like working from home 1 to 2 days a week upon supervisor approval and your job description, whatever. In terms of kind of public meetings, that is still in flux because we had to fire the contractor upgrading the city council chambers. And so I think that's something that is on the plate of the new city manager who starts October 19th, by the way, or the 18th, whatever that Monday is. Not October, pardon me, July. And so I know that that's one of the things that the mayor wants to work out with him in terms of how do we do public meetings and where do we meet, when do we start them, and where do we hold them, as the council chambers probably won't get finished until late fall, early winter.
All right, I was curious because as California opened up, Governor Newsom, didn't let that excuse expire to have virtual meetings. So I'm just wondering if the city's got their eye on when the state of California will say, no, you have to have your public meetings in person from here on out. I know this was a special exemption during the pandemic. So just got my eye on that. Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm going to sort of say, look, the genie's out of the bottle, and I think we've already experienced what it feels like to have virtual meetings. So to the extent that we can, influence the idea here, I would certainly highly recommend that certainly our commission's meeting has been very productive, given the earlier start and given the fact that we can attract a lot of folks in the audience. And so I want to encourage the city to consider these facts. Great. Thank you all and good night. We will see you in 30 days.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you all. Good night.
Night.